on this bill and make the motion, and I accept it, then all testimony will cease, and then a vote will have to ensue. So we're not going to accept any motions until all testimony is heard today. We do have 2 absences today. Ms. Corbett and Ms. Liu are not here today. But nonetheless, this is a very important issue, Mr. Hollingsworth, and we're going to be hearing your bill today, one of many that are moving through the legislature today. It's an important matter, pensions, not only for state, local government employees, but folks like you and me, Mr. Hollingsworth, that work for the state and don't have a pension. It's an important issue for us, too. Mr. Cox, who I'm hoping will be here in a little bit, talked to me earlier today about time limits on the testimony. We do have a rule of limiting testimony in this committee, but given that it is such an important issue, I'm not going to limit testimony, but I'm going to ask those that are testifying to be courteous and respectful of the time and not talk forever. If you want to be here till 9 p.m. tonight, I can probably do that for you. But I think all of you probably have busy agendas. With that being said, anything else? Mr. Hollingsworth, welcome. You may present Senate Bill 919.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. SB 919 is a pension reform measure that seeks to realign public employee benefits that are closer to the private sector counterparts. This comprehensive reform package would apply only to new employees hired following enactment of this bill, and it is estimated to save $110 billion in reduced pension costs to the taxpayers in payouts over 30 years. Recent studies by universities such as Stanford, University of Chicago, and Northwestern each independently estimate that the state has around a $500 billion unfunded pension debt. This is almost 6 times the size of the current state budget. In the last 10 years, the cost to taxpayers for public employee retirement benefits has increased from 2,000% from just about $150 million per year 10 years ago to over $3 billion this year. These escalating costs were the result of generous increases in pension benefits coupled with a downturn in the stock market. Now, faced with the unprecedented fiscal crisis and record high unemployment, the state needs to bring bold action to state employee retirement pension system and health care costs in order to bring them under control. The landmark benefit increase came in 1999, which enhanced benefits by as much as 50% and provided cost of living retirement allowances for state and school retirees who retired prior to 1998. At the time, CalPERS had a huge surplus of investment earnings from a booming stock market. Legislators were told that there would be little increase to state pension costs for over a decade. However, you can see from this chart over here to my right that 5 years later, the state contribution ballooned to $2.5 billion. And in the 2010-2011 budget, the state's contribution is slated to be $3.5 billion. The Department of Finance estimates the state's contribution will rise to $5.9 billion by the 2015-2016 budget. There are some who foresee limited investment earnings in the years ahead, which will continue to put a strain on state budget dollars that must be diverted to cover rising pension costs. I'd like to repeat that. In the years ahead, we will see a strain on state budget dollars that will have to be diverted to cover rising pension costs. That means even more cuts to services, Mr. Chairman. According to the former CalPERS chief actuary, Ron Sealing, he said, quoting, "I don't want to sugarcoat anything. We're facing decades without significant turnarounds in assets. Decades of what my personal words, nobody else's, would characterize as unsustainable pension costs of between 25% of pay for a miscellaneous plan and 40 to 50% of pay for a safety plan. Unsustainable pension costs. We've got to find other solutions." The end of his quote. The courts have ruled that pension benefits are a vested right, the equivalent of binding legal contracts, no matter what happens to state and local budgets. We agree with that. We're not seeking to change that, and since those pension benefits are set in stone, when CalPERS loses big, the taxpayers are on the hook to make up the difference. And when investment earnings fall short of projections, the same thing happens. Last year, CalPERS reported a staggering $56 billion loss, almost a quarter of its entire investment portfolio. Due to the heavy losses experienced at CalPERS, funding levels dropped to 60%, well below the established acceptable minimum of 80%. The state is now forced to spend more money to meet pension and health care obligations guaranteed to state workers at the same time that public services and resources are being cut. Recent CalPERS studies indicate workers are retiring younger and living longer, which may trigger yet another rate hike. While we cannot change the situation we find ourselves in regarding our obligations for current employees, we can modify the public pension system for new employees. For every day the pension system remains unchanged, more employees enter this unsustainable system that, left untouched, will lead to the fiscal ruin of California. By using the method of smoothing to set the required state contribution, CalPERS is betting that its investment earnings will outpace our pension obligations. We can't count on the stock market to dig us out of this deep hole we find ourselves in, and it would be irresponsible to stand by and do nothing, thus passing this looming problem on to the next generation. According to a January study by the Public Policy Institute, 76% of Californians view the amount of money being spent on public employee pension systems as a big problem. The same study found that 2/3 of Californians favor switching new state employees to a 401k style plan. This doesn't do that. This is mild reform. These numbers, by Californians' opinions, show a growing consensus by the taxpayers that they've had enough and are ready for this type of reform. The reforms contained in this measure are not draconian. They're very mild, to say the least. Under the new formulas proposed in SB 919, state workers would still receive a guaranteed defined benefit that is still both attractive and secure, while significantly reducing the state's pension burden over time. The bill seeks to realign public employee benefits so they're closer to their private sector counterparts. It would require non-public safety employees to work until the age of 65 to receive both full benefits. And SB 919 would require public safety employees, including CHP, firefighters, correctional officers, and other peace officers, to work 7 years longer in order to qualify for full retirement benefits at age 57. It would also change the final compensation calculation and take into account the highest 3 years of wages instead of the highest 1 year that currently applies.
To 57, for 50 to 57 for CHP, correct?
Yes, correct, for all public safety.
All public safety.
This bill would end state safety benefits for those who are granted benefits pursuant to SB 183, such as milk inspectors and pest control specialists, and would return those classifications to the miscellaneous and industrial classification. 919 would increase the amount that employees must contribute toward their retirement and would also require state employees to work for 25 years to be fully vested for lifetime retirement health care benefits. California's individual income tax is one of the highest and most progressive in the nation. You can see from the chart there that if we could ask the sergeants to maybe face it towards the committee, the answer is not increased taxes. Our sales and gas taxes are also the highest in the nation, and our business climate ranks 48th in the United States. In a recent survey of CEOs last week, we were 50th. We constantly hear the word taxes as one of the repeated solutions for the budget shortfall and other contributions such as this. But the voters clearly spoke last May when they rejected a series of tax increases. And we can see that tax increases are no longer an option. We have to rein in public pension costs. The choice is clear. The choice is ours. We have to take control over the ever-increasing pension costs or be forced to make more painful cuts to schools, parks, universities, and healthcare programs over the next several decades. I have a couple of witnesses, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to testify in support. First is David Crane, Special Advisor for Jobs and Economic Growth for the Governor, and the former Director of Finance, Mike Genest, as well as Jason Clemens, Director of Research at the Pacific Research Institute, and also available and testifying will be the graduate students from Stanford who published the recent study on the pension system and the liabilities therein. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Don't all rush up at once.
Can we ask questions now, or we ask? Yeah, I guess we put them out on the table. You may just told them.
I'll have the first one, Mr. Crane. What is your relationship to Goldman Sachs? Never mind.
None to my
I
knowledge.
retract that question.
Fair enough.
On the attack.
Shall I
Go
proceed?
ahead. Begin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to visit with you today on this important matter. Pensions are a simple concept, often made unduly complex. So to make sure we're all on the same page, I thought I'd start with a few basics. When the state makes a pension promise to a state employee, it's promising to pay money to the employee at points in the future. Thus, state pension obligations are no different than state debt obligations, which likewise are promises to pay amounts in the future. But they differ in two important respects. One, voter approval is not required for pension obligations. Governors and legislators have all the responsibility in that regard. And two, pension costs, unlike debt service costs, are neither capped nor precisely quantifiable in advance. So those pension promises translate into costs for the state budget at two times. First, when the promise is made, at which time the state and the employee jointly make payments known as contributions to the pension fund, CalPERS, for example, with the expectation that the combination of those contributions and investment earnings on those contributions will meet the cost of the future pension payments promised to the employee. Second, if and when additional payments are required in the event that combination is not sufficient to meet the promised pension payments. In that case, in that latter case, only the state is required to make up the deficiency. It's the second of those two items that makes our pension system a defined benefit system, because the state employee is assured of a defined benefit regardless of how well or poorly investments perform. And it's the second of those two items that explains in part how the state can end up with extra costs from pension obligations, such as we're seeing now. So I want to take a moment now and just talk about those extra costs and say the following. In 1999, CalPERS projected that pensions would cost the state budget an average of $450 million per year during the next 11 fiscal years, from the fiscal year 2000 through 2011. Or a total of $5 billion. But instead, CalPERS will cost the state an average of $2.3 billion per year for that period, or a total of $25 billion. As you can tell, CalPERS was off in its projections by a factor of 5. This resulted from CalPERS earning less than it assumed it would earn, forcing the state to make up the difference. For the next 29 fiscal years, CalPERS projects it will draw, on average, $9 billion per year from the state budget, or $265 billion. That projection is also based on assumptions, a subject we will come back to in a moment. Now, I have not seen CalPERS's projections beyond the next 29 years, but because state pension promises extend well beyond 29 years, those projections are needed. Now, the consequences of rising pension costs are the following. Pension payments are senior obligations of the state to its employees and accordingly have priority over every other expenditure except Proposition 98, that is K through 14 expenditures, and arguably even before debt service. This senior priority of pension promises means two things. One, that state employees face no risk that their pensions won't be paid because the state's promise to them is not only unconditional, but also senior in priority and in addition secured by pension fund assets. And number two, all of the consequences of rising pension costs fall on the budgets for programs such as higher education, health and human services, parks and recreation, and environmental protection that are junior in priority and therefore have their funding reduced whenever more money is needed to pay for pension costs. Thus, those who should be the most concerned about pension costs are families and businesses concerned about California's colleges and universities, recipients of the state's health and human services, users of state parks, citizens interested in environmental protection, and current and future state employees concerned about the potential for pay increases. Pension costs are rising for three reasons. One, inadequate initial contributions. Two, the large retroactive pension increase enacted in 1999. And three, the masking of debt, that is, the issuance of more pension debt that is reported. Let me take a moment just to address each of these, and then I will finish with my remarks. First, inadequate initial contributions. CalPERS has not been requiring adequate contributions when pension promises are made, virtually assuring deficiencies for which only the state is on the hook. You will recall from my earlier remarks that both the state and its employees fund initial contributions but only the state picks up deficiencies. This means the state takes all the risk if initial contributions are inadequate. Initial contributions are determined by investment return assumptions. So for example, in 1999, CalPERS based pension contributions on an 8.25% annual investment return, which implicitly forecast that the Dow Jones would reach 25,000 by 2009 and 28 million by 2099. As a result, in respect of an employee expected to retire in, let's say, 40 years, with, let's say, a $75,000 pension, that meant CalPERS required an upfront contribution jointly from the employer and the employee of roughly $3,150. If CalPERS had assumed, say, a 6% return, the upfront contribution, again made jointly, would have been roughly $7,300. Now, if the actual return ends up equaling the assumed return, all is well. There's no deficiency. But if CalPERS requires only $3,150 up front and then earns 6%, there will be a deficiency in the amount of $43,000, all of which the state must pay. Of course, the deficiency is even greater if CalPERS earns less than half its investment return assumption, which has been the case since 1999. This delta between investment return assumption and actual return explains just a portion of the state's rising pension costs. Now, since 1999, CalPERS has lowered its investment return assumption to 7.75%. But that assumption remains high compared to others. For example, Warren Buffett assumes a much lower investment return for his defined benefit plans, even though his investment record is much better than CalPERS. In the preceding example, the upfront contribution required by Buffett would be nearly 40% greater than that required by CalPERS. CalPERS's investment return assumption also affects CalPERS's projections of future costs for the state. For example, when I mentioned earlier that CalPERS projects that it will draw on average $9 billion per year from the state over the next 29 years, implicitly requires the stock market to double every 10 years and to keep doubling at that rate. Anything less and the cost to the state will be larger. Even just a little bit less makes a huge difference in costs incurred by the state. For example, the state's pension costs over that 11-year period discussed earlier were 5 times the amounts projected by CalPERS as a result of an actual investment return that was just 43% of its assumed investment return. That disproportionate outcome, that is a 500% change in costs, 100% incurred by the state, resulting from a 57% decline in investment return, demonstrates the immense power of compounding when you have long-term liabilities such as pensions. All of that risk falls on the state. The second major reason for these massive cost increases is the 1999 pension increase. In 1999, as many of you know, because some of you were in the legislature at that time, the legislature passed and sent to Governor Davis SB 400, a bill that embodied the CalPERS proposal, which is this document. If you would like to see it, sure. In that proposal, CalPERS advocated large and retroactive pension increases for active and new employees without requiring an increase in upfront pension contributions, promising that, quote, no increase over current employer contributions is needed for these benefit improvements, end quote, and that CalPERS would, quote, remain fully funded, end quote, despite the increases. The CalPERS proposal claimed that enhanced pensions would not cost taxpayers, quote, a dime, end quote, because investment returns would cover the expense. Presumably in reliance upon those representations, the legislature passed SB 400 and Governor Davis signed the legislation shortly thereafter. After making all those affirmative representations, this 17-page document then failed to disclose the following. 1, that the state was on the hook for deficiencies should actual investment returns fall short of assumed returns. 2, that those assumed investment returns implicitly required the Dow Jones to reach 25,000 by 2009 and 28 million by the end of the century. 3, that potential costs to the state were uncapped. 4, that CalPERS' own employees would benefit from the pension increases. And 5, that members of CalPERS' board had received campaign contributions from beneficiaries of the legislation. The sales pitch even included testimonials from the state's highest financial officer, as well as others who had received contributions from beneficiaries of the legislation. Now, you mentioned Goldman Sachs. It's nothing short of astonishing that the CalPERS proposal, which promoted the largest non-voter approved debt issuance in the state's history, was not accompanied by disclosures of risks or conflicts of interest. Frankly, I've never seen a document like this, and even what Goldman Sachs is alleged to have done looks like child's play in comparison. This episode illustrates the perverse nature of CalPERS's governance. The party with 100% of the risk and 0% of the upside, that is, the people of the state of California, have no control over CalPERS. Indeed, what little influence the citizens have, which comes through the officials they elect and who sit on CalPERS's board, is diluted because those officials can receive contribution from CalPERS's beneficiaries and others, such as money managers who earn fees from CalPERS. In reviewing the legislative history, as I mentioned, I noticed that some of you on this committee were in the legislature when SB 400 was passed, so presumably you remember this well, and the representations that were made and the disclosures that were not made to you. I can only hope that everything would have been different had everything been disclosed to you back then. The third reason is debt masking, which I will not get into because I know you have Stanford testifying after this. So let me move right to what can be done, and then I'll stop talking. Nothing can be done about promises already made and pensions already underfunded. As a result, the state will be funding enormous deficiencies for decades to come. Indeed, we should all pray that CalPERS really and truly earns at the investment return assumption it assumes, so that deficiency costs don't grow beyond what's now projected. All we can do is, 1, stop adding to our growing pension debt. 2, require full disclosure to the real party at risk, the citizens. 3, prevent pension funds from utilizing excessive investment return assumptions. And 4, change pension fund governance to reflect the citizens' interests and to prohibit conflicts of interest. In practice, this means reducing the size of pension promises being made to new employees, adopting at least the model of disclosure which New York City has adopted, and making public all information necessary for independent analyses, governing investment return assumptions, proposing a constitutional amendment to change CalPERS's governance, and adopting the municipal bond type rules that ban business with anyone who contributes or provides gifts to board members or staff. Regarding the first item, SB 919 would appear to be an excellent move in the direction of reducing promises to new employees. Recently, Illinois has enacted pension reform of a similar nature that extends retirement ages and vesting periods, reduces benefits, changes formulas, and caps pension eligible compensation. Regarding the second item, which is disclosure, recently a Northwestern University professor projected that California's pensions will run out of cash in 2026, the consequences of which, of course, would fall on the citizens. Yet they can't know if that's likely until and unless our pension funds provide all the information necessary for an independent analysis. As their representatives, you simply must demand full disclosure from state pension funds. Regarding the fourth item, I recommend you take the advice of Gerard Miller, who testified recently in front of the Little Hoover Commission about proper governance of public pension funds. In brief, I would encourage board dominance by independent members who are numerate, and as President Obama has characterized one of his criteria for his next Supreme Court nominee, who have empathy for those actually affected by pension fund decisions and performance, such as parents, students, and healthcare recipients. In this regard, I have a special word for my fellow Democrats. One cannot both be a progressive and be opposed to pension reform. The math is irrefutable that the losers from excessive and unfunded pensions are precisely the programs that progressive Democrats tend to applaud. Those programs are being driven out of existence by rising pension costs. Finally, regarding the fifth item, it's not nearly enough just to make placement agents register as lobbyists. as proposed under some legislation currently in front of the legislature. Instead, you must make it clear that people who make contributions or provide gifts are banned from doing business with state pension funds. By the way, one of the greatest benefits from introducing such a rule is that CalPERS's investment staff, which is very good, would finally be able to focus on its one and only job of importance, achieving the highest risk-adjusted yield at the lowest cost. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee, I see.
You know, some of those things sound really good, just none of them are in this bill. So all of the things you just said that we need to do to deal with these issues, none of those are in the bill before us, and it might be interesting to have those, but I don't want the public out there to come away with the impression that that's what this bill does, because none of the disclosure things you're talking about, none of the conflict of interest issues, none of what you just said are the things we need to do to fix this are in this bill.
One of the things is in there,
What?
which is to lower the benefits for new employees.
Right,
Which is one of
but
the
that
things
is
I made.
not, well, but most of the ones you did right there at the end were all this disclosure and concern about how CalPERS is run, which I think is a separate topic, a legitimate one, but is different than what is before us, which is, you know, I mean, at the frustration and to the extent, you know, you're representing the governor's office here is that it, you know, this is mostly due to the fact that we have not bargained. Everybody who's done anything with these pensions in the past, and I was here then, I do not recall this legislation so much, but I do recall what was going on in 98, 99, and 2000. And the big mistake that I think we all realize now we made, it's the same mistake we made with respect to the budget, the same mistake that has caused us to have problems with the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which is we took the good times and said, oh, goody, goody, let's give the money back. And so we didn't pay into the fund when we should have. That's why the numbers look a little skewed on this 10-year average, because for 3 years we made no contributions to PERS. It was a mistake. I think a lot of local governments who did the same thing, resting on the stock market laurels, got into the same thing. It was the same sort of mentality that caused us to do tax breaks when times were good, instead of saving up the money for when times were bad, when we should be doing tax breaks. Same thing happened with unemployment insurance, where people pay, you know, we lower the rates when the fund is healthy, which is nuts. Because when the fund is healthy and things are going well is when people can afford to continue to pay into it. If you pay in at a steady rate, then when times get bad, there's a cushion. This one was the same thing. I remember people telling us in 97 and 98 and 99, no problem, we don't need to make payments into PERS right now. And we should have made payments into PERS, and we would not then have this sort of up and down thing that we're seeing here. The other thing that happened, and I think isn't accounted for in the way you're characterizing the benefits, is that most folks bargained. The folks who got contracts in that period and in the following 3 years mostly bargained for no increases and got some of these changes in benefits to go with their no increase. So people were getting no salary increases. They were committing to no salary increases for long periods of time. And some of these things come together in the collective bargaining. That can go both ways. You can say, okay, we're going to have these salaries and then have these pension changes. It's my understanding that most units have now already bargained to do the 3-year deal that I think Senator Hollingsworth is proposing here for everybody, which most of us think is probably wise to do 3-year, not 1 year, you know, the 1 year, the one highest year thing. But most everybody has bargained for that already. And the others have been open to bargaining. It's just the governor's office has refused to bargain with anybody for 4 or 5 years. So, you know, how you come back and then ask us to do this when there is ability under existing law for some of these things to happen, and they happen in the context of the bargaining table. That's where they've traditionally happened. There's nothing wrong with some of the notions, but they have to be put in the context of an overall. And I don't, and this is Senator Hollingsworth maybe, and I don't see in here, I don't know that we even have the ability to be adjusting local pension rates. And then what happens is the same people who are in CalPERS as public safety employees for local government are making 3 and 4 times what our people are and getting better pensions. Why would anybody work for us?
Maybe, Senator, if I could jump in here just to address a couple of the questions that Senator Cheney raised. First of all, I'm agnostic to whether or not these reforms are achieved through collective bargaining or legislation or both. They just have to be achieved. Secondly, the governor's office has been very actively engaged and aggressively engaged in bargaining and seeking bargains with unions. And the governor's chief of staff has taken a very personal interest.
Yeah, mostly in rejecting the contracts that were given to them.
Well,
that
that
you
is-
bargained on the DPA bargained in good faith, and the governor backed away from the contract that was on the table.
Well,
Let me just say, we do have a representative from DPA, and they'll be testifying later on, so.
It's okay. No,
You have the right to ask the questions, but I want to make sure that we
Just
get
trying to
these
keep the facts
facts
straight.
on the table here.
yeah, well, that's a fact. Well, what I just stated is a fact. The governor's office is aggressively engaged in bargaining, but I'm indifferent to whether or not it's
We would
achieved.
dispute that fact, but okay, we'll have other people dispute it.
But what's critical for the citizens of the state of California is that whether it's through legislation or bargaining, it has to be achieved. Otherwise, all the programs, you can't argue with the math. All the programs that I assume you care about and that my fellow citizens care about are going to be crushed. They're already being crushed, but they're going to be crushed out of existence.
I don't agree that the pensions are what's causing that, but, you know, we can have that discussion in a budget. But I'm concerned about this question of local competition and that how we then compete with our own local governments who are paying higher salaries and higher benefits than we are.
Well, I think that somebody
in
from
the public
DPA
safety
would be
region.
better than I would at describing the competition that's potentially there from other jurisdictions. That's not an area in which.
But, Mr. Chair,
Well, hold on a second.
no, just for
Yeah, but that's fair.
clarification,
Go ahead. Fair.
the legislature granted to local governments the authority to enter into those enhanced benefits. And so in working our way out of the problem that Mr. Crane has described in sort of scary detail, we have the state, the legislature has the authority there. We also have the authority over those
Yes, we do.
authorities that we grant to local governments. And so, you know, whether we do it in one step or many, somebody's got to begin. And I think that's the message here.
Yeah, it's just tricky that a lot of the state contributions are based on things that other folks, this is my ongoing beef, is that everybody else gets to set the salaries and the benefits and we just pay them. And it's mostly county employees, it's UC and CSU employees, and it's school employees who are taking up the bulk of this. We don't negotiate any of those contracts, and yet somehow it's on us to pass legislation to change it. I mean, it's apples and
if I
oranges
might, Mr.
sometimes.
Do you want to address that, Mr. Hollingsworth?
I don't
please?
want to have us operating under any misperception. This is dealing with the state's portion of this crisis. Now, the crisis is big enough at $500 billion that we should be concerned about it, and this deals with about $110 billion of that $500 billion, but the state's portion of that $500 billion is not all of it. You're right; it does involve the locals, but to both your points, Senators Ashburn and Senator Ducheney, this does not affect what the locals do. This is dealing with just the state portion.
And let me
But
say,
we-
Mr. Hollingsworth, that
That's the problem.
With previous legislation, such as SB 400, we gave the horse rein, and the locals filled that in, and so did the bargaining process. And so, as Senator Ashburn mentioned, now that we are aware of this crisis heading towards us, we have to rein the horse back in and take away some of the free rein.
a couple of just thoughts from my end, which is we have CalPERS, and we'll go ahead and ask you what your perception is on the numbers as well, the $500 billion, or if there's any other numbers, what your assumptions are,
Can we-
how you arrive at those.
Can we get to that after we finish our?
Yes, I said we'll later on. And David, Mr. Crane, let me tell you the
David.
other issue that I thought is interesting. You touched upon it, and Denise did too, which is you have this issue of employer holidays. Okay, you pass legislation, 99-2000 for about 3 years. No employer paid a single dime into the system because it was adequately funded. And like Denise said, actually you, David, you said, you know, as a Democrat, maybe you want to do these good things. But I would propose to you, Democrat or Republican, you want to fix the potholes. You want to do certain things that your constituents want. And so you have a choice. when you don't pay into these pension funds, what to do with that money. Do you fix the pothole, or do you send money to add to the pension contributions? Well, I think most in the state of California fix the potholes. At the same time, again, a lot of these folks locally or at the state are bargaining, okay, at a local level or at state, you're asking pay raise or add to your pension. I think a lot of individuals made the decision, increase the pension benefits, don't give them the pay raise, we have more money to fix the potholes. So we have an interesting conflict here and inconsistency because 10 years later, here we are today. And how do you legislate something that will hold other legislators bound to make sure that you always pay a minimum into these pension funds?
You have to be strict. And you are 100% right.
And see,
And I'll take-
you have smoothing, but I don't think that's enough. You have to have a minimum amount.
Smoothing
that
is
you're paying.
what smoothing does actually is take our costs and allocate them to the future generation. So you hit the nail on the head. Employer contributions. You shouldn't be taking money and using it for potholes when you owe money. You have to pay your bills, and if you don't pay your bills, when you make promises and you don't pay your bills, you're just incurring a much larger expense for someone down the road. By the way, at a very high interest rate. And the reason that they took those employer holidays, for example, and they cut contributions to such low levels is for the reasons that I described in here that Senator Cheney thought were extraneous, but it's all about what CalPERS presented to you. CalPERS told you you could cut your contributions. CalPERS told you that you were fully funded. CalPERS did not tell you the actual amount of debt that the state owed. CalPERS used inflated earnings assumptions without even providing you, at the exact time in 1999 when they were telling you to boost pensions benefits without increasing contributions, at the exact same time, Warren Buffett in 1999 was saying the exact opposite, that the bet that they were making at CalPERS was going to be a losing proposition. But none of that was presented to you in this proposition, this CalPERS proposal, which is stunning. Your legislators, and debt is being issued under your nose without you even knowing about it and it being presented to you. So you want to make sure employer contributions, that there are no more of these holidays? Make sure of it. That's why you have to do something about the governance of CalPERS.
No, that part, I agree. I was trying to say, I agree with some of that. It's just none of that's in the bill before us, and it's not analyzed, and so it's difficult to talk about today.
You can always add it.
So,
And, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask that we
propose it.
try to stay to the contents of the bill that are before us, because this is a very big topic. Mr. Crane has laid it out in, again, the totality of the problem and the potential impacts and the ways in which we got where we are, at least in his opinion. And so, this hearing is going to take on a much larger scope if we go down this road of questioning. And so I'm going to request that we stick with the bill that's before us.
And
have
Mr.
Steve
Ashburn, I
stay
will
with that.
definitely intend to go in the direction you want us to go, but at the same time, I got to tell you that I think this issue has multifacets. And
I agree.
in one specific area, I don't think we're going to get a chance to have this debate again in this legislature here for a number of
But,
months.
Mr. Chair, this should be the beginning of many on
About
each
6
of the
weeks.
facets. And
About
so,
6 weeks.
let's devote this hearing to the bill that's actually before us.
A public hearing on this issue as opposed to. But anyway, any further questions for Mr. Crane? I'll look forward to talking
Thank
to
you.
you later on, sir, on some of the reform issues you brought up.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Senators. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having me here. I want to start by introducing myself. I want to point out that I'm not an expert on pensions, or at least not the arcane details of the pension system, and I no longer speak for the governor. In fact, I'm here as a private citizen and as a state retiree. And I am currently getting a pension. I've been listening to the testimony, and I did a little quick calculation. If we went back to what I was doing in the year 2000 and looked at my salary then and the position I had then, which was working for Senator Hollingsworth's counterpart at the time, Senator Brulte, Senator Johnson, and looked at the rules that were in effect before SB 400 was enacted, I would be getting a pension today of substantially less than half of what I am actually getting, given those increases in my pay over time and given SB 400.
Donate it back.
No, thank you. However, I've often thought
Donated
about
to a special fund for legislators who have no pension.
I've often thought about the spectacle that perhaps it presents for somebody who's getting a very generous pension to talk about pension reform. Number one, one reason I'm for it now especially is I think we have to do something to protect our pension system. I don't think there's an immediate danger of me not getting my pension in the next few years, but over time, as Mr. Crane pointed out, the state's ability to fund services is going to be in competition with paying my pension. Now, I'll get my pension, but what about future generations of employees? I think we have to rein it in a bit, and I think that's what this bill does. Also, I wanted to say that taking note of what you were talking about earlier in terms of the scope of the hearing, I will try to confine my remarks to the things that are in the bill. One of the things that is in the bill that will have a direct effect on me and other retirees is the change in the contribution or the state's contribution for health care. I think it's a very modest change. All it does is realign the retirees' health care arrangement with what current state employees are getting. I'm fully in support of that. I won't tell my wife I'm in support of it, but I'll be happy to tell you that. It'll cost us a little money, but I think this is the time when all of us involved with the state are going to have to sacrifice to some degree. But I do think, even though I no longer work for the governor, I still have some call to call myself a budget expert, and that's what that chart over there is about. I wanted to put this bill in the context of the state budget. It's pretty hard to do that without looking at the state's contribution. I've confined myself to looking at the state's contribution in this chart from the general fund because that's where we have most of our budget problems, obviously. There are two lines on the chart. The pension line is the blue line. The retiree health care line is I guess I would call it a pink line. These are all based on CalPERS numbers from last fall, so they're not exactly accurate.
I'm going to interrupt you to do something very important, which is to establish a quorum. I guess so focused on the discussion here. Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Correa.
Present.
Correa here. Ashburn. Present. Ashburn here. Corbett. Cox. Cox here. Ducheney. Ducheney here. Liu.
We have a quorum, and we do need that quorum to take action on your bill, sir. Didn't want to. Go ahead, sir.
So what this chart does is it's based on CalPERS numbers, which means, by the way, one of the things it's based on is that assumption of a 7.75% rate of return on average for the next 30 or so years, an assumption that Mr. Crane has spoken eloquently about. So I would say it's fair to say this is a very optimistic chart. But what these CalPERS numbers show is, the other thing it's based on is, you'll notice this is as a percent of general fund revenue. I'm certainly no seer, as I think recent history has shown. We all can get general fund revenue a little wrong from time to time. All I've done is taken what was in the budget that the governor signed last year, the assumptions we had then, and projected out beyond the years that had been explicitly projected, which I think was up to 2012, just at 5% growth, because that's the long-term rate of growth of the general fund revenue, and nobody really has a better idea of what it will be than that. So the assumption underlying this is that general fund revenue after a period of time will grow at 5%. And what these numbers show is, this is sort of a mind experiment. What if we said, all right, we're going to step up, we're going to be completely fiscally responsible, we're going to set ourselves a goal of having no unfunded actuarial liability in 30 years. What would that cost the general fund, both for pensions and for retiree health care, as a percent of all general fund money? And you can see what happens. You reach a massive peak. You go from around 2 to almost 4% in pension contributions from the general fund, and you go up to about 2% in pension contributions to retiree health care almost immediately, and then you start over time getting back to normal until at the end of the 30-year period you're about where you were when you started a few years ago. The other thing about this chart, in addition to it being sort of a long-range look, is that I think Ms. Ducheney would be the first to acknowledge, it's very unrealistic to think that we're actually going to voluntarily pump this kind of money into the pension fund in the next year, probably in the next 2 or 3 years. Even though I was a huge proponent inside the administration of starting to pay current costs for retiree health care, that is, to put money aside as we do for pensions, I always knew that in the reality of the budget problems that we face.
Let me interrupt you very quickly and ask you, very, very nice chart here, but you got here the spike going up here what do you account for? What's
Well, this is a
is that
particular
because
plan.
of the state budget as
No.
shrinking as it is?
Because everybody retired because of the
Well,
furloughs.
no, it's not that. This is not what is really going to happen. This is, as I said, a mind experiment. What if we said, okay, we're going to get right, and we're going to immediately embark on a 30-year program
yeah.
to buy down the whole UAAL? And if we did, in order to get there at the end of 30 years, that's what we'd have to do basically next year. Now, as I'm saying, this is not a very realistic thing because we're not going to do that. But here's what's really important about this chart. If you acknowledge, okay, we won't do it that year, so maybe we'll do it in 5 years. You don't go up to 4%. You go up to some astronomical number like 7 or 8%. And the longer you put it off, the higher that mountain is going to be to climb. And that's why it's an urgent matter to do something. We always had trouble explaining, when I was in the administration, to ourselves and to other people, why should we get a pension reform bill today, since it doesn't help us really one dime in the budget, and we have massive budget problems we've got to fix. So it's easy to be overlooked, but if you imagine this peak like a sine wave getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the longer you put it off, the harder it's going to be. And I know we're in an era of term limits, and we all bemoan that when it comes to things like this, but at some point, some legislature is going to have to do what Senator Hollingsworth's bill does, and possibly even more. And the longer you wait, the more you're going to have to do. So I just want to go back to why we're in this situation a little bit, because I think, again, I'm using CalPERS published numbers, but
So, Mr. Janess, your point is change has to happen.
change absolutely has to happen, and the consequences of it not happening are pretty bad. There are really three things that put us into this problem. I mentioned two with my own retirement, pay raises and the increase in payroll generally. That accounts for about 14% of our current unfunded liability, again, using CalPERS numbers. So it's not the major thing. The other one is 35% was caused by SB 400 and other things that were enacted shortly after in that same era. So that was a big thing, but it wasn't the majority. The majority of the reason that we're in this problem is exactly what Mr. Crane was saying, that the legislature and the governor and everyone else has been relying, or did at least at some point rely on the optimistic, it now turns out, assumptions of CalPERS that we would be in the 8 to 9% range of returns. And that goes back some years. And instead of being at 8%, or as we are now at 7.75% assumed, the one-year return was negative 24%. Of course, you will always get fluctuation. That's not anything to necessarily panic about. The 5-year return, that was only 1.5%. And if you go all the way back to the 20-year return, it's only been 7.4%. So I think that shows that there was a lot of risk, and we unfortunately got on the downside of that risk in reality when we were making those decisions way back in 2000.
So do we go talk to the actuarials on this issue, or?
Well, it's an issue. That is an issue for the CalPERS board, and as you have noted, it does not come into play directly in this bill. However, I think it's important to put this bill in perspective. We can do a lot. You can do a lot. If you adopt this bill, you will be making a huge improvement, unfortunately not for next year's budget, but in the future in our fiscal situation, but you won't be doing anything next year. But on the other hand, that I think illustrates the importance of doing it. And the reason I bring it up is I would like to suggest, number one, no one really believes that CalPERS should adopt the same rate of return that Stanford adopted in its study. I mean, someone may believe that. I don't believe that.
What's the Stanford rate of return?
They essentially assume, I think it was a 30-year T-bill rate. So their rate of return is an important thing. It's about 4 or something like that. It's pretty low, although we've had years where it was worse than that. But let me say the reason I think to think about that is that what their study does is it says if you, the legislature, meaning the taxpayer, the legislature, the state, if you want to take zero risk in your pension decisions, you use that rate. I think it's fair to say pensions have typically involved the state and the state taxpayer taking a little risk. Well, unfortunately, that risk has been realized on the downside in the last few years, and we're going to end up paying for it. So you should take some risk, perhaps, and that's a policy decision, maybe in negotiations, maybe as legislation, maybe just let CalPERS do it. But I think what the importance of the Stanford study is it sends to you not just a stop sign, but it sends a big flashing detour sign. It says the amount of risk you have taken in the past is extreme. And if you have to live with that for the future, if you continue down this path, you will at some point be at $500 billion. In other words, the Stanford study should say to you, my chart, I think, should say you need to act right away, even though it doesn't help you tomorrow. And I think the Stanford study should say to you, we have got to do something. We've got to change because there's too much risk, and we're now paying the price for that risk, so let's do something. Let me, with that, just briefly talk about the 14% in the state payroll, because I think there's a lesson for you in that as well, and that lesson is reflected in the proposal in this bill, because the state payroll has, in fact, caused part of the problem we're in. It's increased substantially. It's increased in dollar terms by about 84% since 1998.
Now, is that because of the number of people hired, or is that?
Let me give you some statistics on that.
The governor asked us to do salary increases for all the high-paid folks in
That was
the
a relative-
agencies and the secretaries, and he couldn't hire anybody at the rates we were paying people, and so he asked us to increase their salary.
It's certainly not intending to criticize that decision, having been a beneficiary of it myself. But let me just tell you what the lesson to be taken from this is, and it goes to your question. If you look at the miscellaneous employees, that would be your staff, me, others like that, sort of the bureaucracy. The head count there has gone up 9% in 2 years, not very much. And the payroll there has gone up 57%. Over a 10-year period, that's a lot, but it's not that much. If you look, on the other hand, at the safety, the rest of it, it's gone up substantially more. The miscellaneous share of the payroll has gone down from 71% to 60%. The safety category alone grew by 131% head count and by 278% in dollars. So that's where your push to have a bigger problem in the future is. That's what has been the biggest, as a percent contributor. Still, miscellaneous is still the largest piece of the payroll, but that safety category
Miscellaneous
has been pushing.
includes CSU, right, and UC?
As I said, I'm not an expert on all that sort of thing.
Yeah, but the
what's
two-thirds
the
of the
point
state
there?
employees that are considered state payroll are UC and CSU employees.
Just be CSU, but not UC, I believe.
They're not.
UC has their own
UC is not in the pension, except all their employees who aren't UC. I mean,
But these were numbers provided by CalPERS, and I
Yeah,
think they
but
related to the
that's an important
CalPERS.
point.
This is
That's-
related to the
That's their own
CalPERS
pensions.
pensions only.
UC has their own pension system.
Okay.
Yeah, this was just related to the CalPERS. So my point there is you can't ignore miscellaneous. We had to have cuts, and we're probably going to have more cuts. But you just simply can't afford to continue a pattern of giving the safety categories such a large increase and such a large increase in headcount, because that has really been a significant contributor to the problem, albeit, as I said, the whole issue of the increase in payroll is accounted for 14% of the problem, not any larger percent. Then the final thing I just wanted to mention is that SB 400 accounts for about 35, and that includes some things that happened right after SB 400. Now, this bill, of course,
And I got to tell you that, again, my comment comes back to the issue of the actuarials. You make these decisions based on the data that you're given,
right.
and you find out that maybe it's not, correct, but these actuarials are not free. And
Right.
You pay them, but also the contracts you sign with them limit their liability to most part to what you pay in terms of as a consultant, what you get as a consultant fee. So, my question in my head is, again, looking long term, how do you address this issue?
Well,
And right now, we've had the deepest crash since the Great Depression. So we're coming back and addressing these very important issues. But when the market again goes up, and it will eventually, go through the roof, how do we come up with a system again to keep this ship steady? And,
Well, I would suggest-
And again, all of us will be gone here in a couple of years. So.
The smartest people in the world, which includes many people in this legislature and on the committee, always learn by mistakes made in the past by their predecessors or even by themselves. I mean, if you look at Wall Street, when do we reform Wall Street? Do we reform it during the boom? No. We always reform it right after the crash. We always find some problem or glitch. And that's human nature. It's an unfortunate thing. I think you can look to the Stanford study and say to future legislators, You need, whatever CalPERS says we can do, it's not as if you shouldn't believe them, but you should make your decisions on the risk-free rate of return, which is essentially the Treasury bill rate. And let that other happen if it happens. Let that be gravy, and then have a negotiation. Does the state keep the gravy? Do we give it to the taxpayer? Do we give it to the unions? Whatever it may be, but do it out in the open. That's all fine. But legislatures should learn from what we've gone through in the last 10 years, not to count on those good times going on forever, but instead to take whatever the Treasury bill rate is and say that's all we can count on, and that's all we're going to give away. Now, there's other ways to approach it. Mr. Crane talked about some more systematic changes, but I would say as a rule of thumb, the Stanford report provides a really good cautionary tale for future legislators. I think that the lessons that I take, that I would suggest that you can take from this last history of the last 10 years, is that you, as I said, you should adopt in future decisions a very conservative approach. Take that Treasury bill rate and just assume that's all you have to work with as you make decisions going forward. The state's going to have to constrain its payroll. In fact, it's going to have to cut its payroll. Now, I guess you could look at it as good news that the budget situation is making us do that. It's going to be very difficult to do. I don't see this as a temporary downturn, at least not for the next 10 or so years. Most economists don't think the state revenues in general across the country will return to their inflation-adjusted level that they were in 2007 until 2015. So we will be trimming the state payroll. There is really no alternative to doing that. Even if you were to somehow get a tax increase, I think you'd still have to trim the state payroll because the situation is truly that dire. So maybe that part of the problem is somewhat accounted for, not without a lot of pain, of course, but I think it's going to happen. The real then remaining thing that you can do, and you can do it today, is to enact this bill. It doesn't solve all the problems. Certainly there's many problems that were discussed earlier that would be nice to also address. This bill cannot roll back our costs to where they were in the past because it only addresses the benefits. It doesn't address the salaries, and those were, of course, the biggest piece. But it is a good start. And so with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions, or do we go to, we got Stanford study next?
I think we have the Pacific Research Institute and the Stanford
Okay.
offers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome, Mr. Pacific. And your name, sir?
Jason Clemens.
Thank you, sir.
I'm not going to repeat many of the, I think, important comments that were brought up. I'd just like to make some comments based on my experience, which is largely outside of the state, indeed outside of the country, in 10-plus years of analysis in Canada, which, frankly, has grappled with many of these same issues, and thankfully has fixed them. First, in terms of the bill itself, when I was asked to review it, I did so as earnestly as I could, and I thought it was fairly modest, to be quite frank, given the experience that I've had in changes in Canada, which faced an enormous deficit problem circa 1994. It doesn't touch any existing employees. It certainly doesn't ask for annuitization of current benefits and then on a go-forward basis changing those benefits. So my read of the bill is that it's frankly quite modest in terms of what it's doing. Particularly, I'd focus on the fact that given new employees, they have an expectation. So you're not changing people's plans midstream, particularly if you're 55 or plus. So I would say many of these, the components of the bill, again, modest and certainly in the right direction in terms of the constraints that the pension costs are going to put on you in terms of the budget and the resources that you have available for programs and services. Two broad comments then, if I could, Mr. Chairman. One, something that the federal government in Canada got right is they stopped thinking about pensions as just pensions, and they got to thinking about total compensation. And the real problem Canada had for about 15 years is that they were dissecting the compensation, and one group was talking about pensions, and another group was talking about base salary, and another department was talking about what have you. And really, as employers, you really don't care about the mix. You care about the dollar value. right? I mean, if you're paying someone $100 an hour, you don't really care what the compensation is. You care that it's $100 an hour. And I think a comprehensive approach to understanding that pensions are simply a type of compensation along with other benefits and salaries is key. And I think that has been key in the reforms in New Zealand, in Australia, certainly in the UK. And as I say,
And I'll tell you, I think that's probably something that's not gone unnoticed by a lot of the folks, because again, we're talking about these holidays,
Yeah.
employee holidays. I think that's what they've done. They've substituted one for the other.
Yeah. No, and that's not to say that I think this particular bill, the benefit of trying to move the pension benefits in line with their private sector counterparts isn't productive. I think where I would, as an economist, make the broad comment is that if for some reason the public sector in the state of California said, look, we really don't care about current wages. What we really care about is a very generous pension. The concern for you is, okay, at the end of the day, on an annual or quarterly basis, what's my total compensation cost, including pensions and all the other benefit packages? And I think the concern that you can get to, and this was certainly the experience in Canada, is you get to what was
But again, I would tell you that then you would go back to the question of, you would ask that question of...
They have health care.
Yeah.
In Canada, they have health care.
Well, they're promised health care. The access to that system is a different issue.
Yeah, but they don't have to an unfunded liability for pension health care because
That's right.
there is health care provided by the state.
That's
by
right.
the,
Again, my point is, when you look at the whole thing, again, you're going to come back to, you're going to ask that question to the actuarial, what's the net present value of this bundle of
Absolutely.
goods?
Absolutely.
And then we come back to, again, the question that I asked earlier, which is, how do you figure what that is in the future? And that, I think, is the issue at hand.
Well, I think part of the issue, though, if we're talking about actuarial process, is are we using benchmarks in addition to the actuarial report? And I think the experience on far too many actuarial reports is they're taking as standalone documents without any benchmarking. And I certainly think benchmarking is a fairly easy, straightforward way to make sure that you're not getting a skewed actuarial report that says the best year out of the last 20 is now going to be the normal year for the next 20.
But I'll tell you, it sounds like, again, as we address these issues, you just get into the issues of the assumptions you make and who you ask.
No, but again, I think the benchmarking, to get into a narrow issue, benchmarking is important because it says not only are we going to consider this specific evaluation of the program, but we're then going to look at the universe of evaluations in terms of rate of return assumptions, inflation assumptions, demographic assumptions, et cetera. So the only other comment I would make, which is where I spend more of my time on a weekly basis, is on the tax side. When I have looked at the labor market in the state over the last year and a half, it seems quite clear to me that we have a fairly dysfunctional labor market, and that the top 10 priorities for the government right now needs to be about job creation. 1 through 10 really needs to be about job creation. And I would urge members of the committee to look at the competitiveness on the tax side.
So you're looking to raise taxes? Is that what
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If we're looking at particularly the sensitive taxes like corporate income taxes, and we look on a regional basis, I think the state has some real problems when we're looking at the labor market, our ability to attract and develop domestic and foreign investment into the state. I think one of the problems we've got clearly is on the tax side in terms of tax competitiveness. So I know that, and I apologize to Senator Ashburn, I know that there was a request to keep it narrow to the bill, but I think one of the things we want to keep in context is the choices we have available are not in and of themselves existing in a vacuum. That if the choice to solve the pension problem is an increase in taxes, that has both direct and indirect effects. And in my view, some of those tax increases could have not only a direct effect, but a very strong direct effect in terms of the state of the overall California economy. So again, I don't want to repeat some of the things that were said by the two predecessors. I think they were important.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Questions from the committee?
I have a question. I had somebody bring down a document just because I think we do need a basic factual basis, and I think some of the statements made about increase in employee payrolls and stuff may leave people with the wrong impression. And I remembered a schedule. This is the governor's budget, 8 pages. And the number of state employees per 1,000 population that we fund now is the same number that it was in 1983 when Governor Deukmejian was governor. And the amount that we're spending on state payroll if you do it per $100 of personal income, which is more of an apples-to-apples comparison, is the lowest that it's been since 1972 at the moment. So this whole notion that we're paying so much and we haven't been constraining, there may have been increases in payroll the way Mr. Janess described, except they're basically, I don't know, I think they may be because of initiatives for prison issues, some of those areas where we don't have as much control, and the only other major place where you could limit payroll is by denying access to universities, because that is where most of our state employees work.
Just to note, when we're talking
It's
about...
not real good for competitiveness either.
When we're talking, though, about the size of the public sector, I think the economics are quite wrong when you compare it to residents, because you're creating a bias in the comparison in terms of retirees and the structure, the age structure of your population. I think a much more important ratio is the private sector workforce relative to the public sector workforce.
Question for you, Denise.
Sorry, not that I brought that. I don't think that wasn't with respect
Most
to my
of our
testimony.
employees are at universities, is that what you said?
Well, yes, state employees that are funded out of the general fund is UC, CSU, and prisons. And after that, it's $3 billion, less than 3% of the general fund. Just saying.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Your next witness in support, sir.
I believe we have Cameron Percy and Moritz Zender from the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Cameron Percy, and I'm joined by Moritz, and we're here to sort of represent our group of 5 co-authors who produced the policy brief for the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. Our study focused on sort of quantifying the true shortfall in the California pension system. And to achieve that, we focused on numbers provided by CalPERS, CalSTRS, and UCRS. So our analysis is really limited to those 3. So today, we're here to present the study and answer any questions you may have. Moritz will sort of name 2 key
Are there
findings.
copies of this study around anywhere?
Yes,
We can leave
we have.
copies with you. We brought some extra copies.
And I think it's also important to highlight that while at this current point in our lives where all 5 co-authors are graduate students, when we produced this study, we brought to bear work experience from Bain Capital Management, Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, the Scowcroft Group, and UBS. And so we approached this study with the kind of rigor that we have been trained to possess, both by Stanford and our previous employers. So with that, Moritz?
Sure. So I thought I would just mention, make a couple of remarks of how to this number, the $500 billion shortfall, where it comes from, and maybe then answer questions that you may have. So I think there's really one aspect in our study that is key to understand, and maybe that's a correction to what was previously said. So as David Crane made clear previously, is that pensions are really financial commitments that the state has made to its current employees. These are fixed promises. They're guaranteed by law, and Mr. Janess will not have to worry about his pension. These promises are certain. They will have to be paid, and they will have to be paid in the future. And what we do in the study is we calculate the present value of these future financial obligations that the state has that are going to have to be paid in the future. And in our analysis, given that they're legally guaranteed by the state, and there's really no risk involved in those obligations, meaning that they will not be reduced. They can be reduced. In fact, I understand that also the intent of the bill is not to reduce pensions of existing current employees. These are fixed promises that the state has made, and they can be reduced. And when we want to know the present value today, how much are these promises worth today, really the only discount rate to discount the present value of these future pension promises is a risk-free rate. And that's exactly what we did. We discounted future pension promises using a discount rate that reflects the risk that is inherent to those financial promises. And that is not what the financial reporting of CalPERS and CalSTRS does. How they discount these future pension promises is that they use the the rate that they expect to return, they expect to earn on the funds that they have set aside to pay these obligations. But that doesn't make sense. When you discount future financial promises, you're not interested in how these promises are funded. The only thing you're interested in how safe these promises are, and when there is no risk, the only rate you can use is the risk-free rate. So that's what we did, and that's why we came up with this.
Let me ask you,
Sure.
so the risk-free rate based on which bond?
These are T-bills, Treasury
What
bills,
maturity?
10 years. 10 years. That's the most commonly accepted proxy for a risk-free rate.
But just since we're talking really financial theory here,
Right.
let's also understand that there is no such thing as risk-free
Right.
in this
so,
universe, right? That's
Right.
why some of our investors are moving from the dollar to the euros.
Right.
Okay? You take your money, you put it in the bank, that's about as risk-free as you can, but you
Right.
also have other risks are interest rate risk, inflation risk.
In fact, you have an inflation risk. Actually, the pension
So there
obligations
isn't
are
any risk-free
inflation
rate.
adjusted.
There isn't any risk-free rate. So I guess
There's a prudent man return on investment that you,
Yes.
I mean,
the actuarial people look at.
okay, be careful because now you want to go back and ask the actuarials what the prudent man rate would probably not be the risk-free rate.
Saying that's what the rules are.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I'm just making the point that that individual, I mean, when you make net present value assumptions, the key there is your rate of return or the discount rate that you use, and that's one that you use a 10-year Treasury.
Right.
But that's one that I got to tell you, you talk CalPERS, CalSTRS. What about other pension funds throughout the state or throughout the country? What rate do they use?
the average rate that they're using is an 8%, but that's the
8%.
expected 8%.
And you use what?
We use 4%.
Okay. I just
We do not assume
The
a return.
point here is that
no risk, and nobody else in the world does. Got it. Let's move on.
Well, no, I'm just saying. I just want to make sure we know, what we're doing.
Right.
But go ahead.
Well, I think the point of our study is that the expected rate of return is completely irrelevant to the present value of financial promises that you're making that essentially have no risk. It's irrelevant. The only thing you can talk to any financial economist in the world. When you're discounting a future financial promise, the only thing you're interested in is the risk inherent to that financial promise. And in financial theory, the most commonly accepted proxy for a risk-free rate is the Treasury yield. And that's about 4%, and that's the rate where we used. It's completely irrelevant how these
I would
obligations
disagree with you.
are
It's
funded.
completely irrelevant. I mean, maybe in your study it is, but I would just say you just use some terms that are so definitive that it's totally irrelevant.
It is.
And I would say that I would question that statement that you've made, and not to bang on your study, but go ahead, continue to.
Right. So I think
thank you very much for the initiative, by the way.
Right.
I remember
Sure,
when I
appreciate
was in business school doing a couple of studies like this, but mine was a little bit different.
Okay.
Mine
Well,
was to
I
see
guess
how much insider trading was going on Wall Street based on the stock movement of the stock and how the stock moved 3 days before the actual announcement of the big impact, and you found that there was a lot of insider trading.
Oh, surprise. What was that last week? No, that was a while ago when he was in graduate school.
That was 2 years ago when I was in business school, or was that 20 years? I forget. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Some things haven't changed.
That's right. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, anyway, I just want to reiterate. What we did is we compared the present value of funds that are actually now in the pension funds and the present value of future financial promises and of pension promises. And we think when you compare these, when you make an apples to apples comparison, the risk-free rate that we want to apply to pension promises in the future is a risk-free rate because there's no risk inherent to state pension promises. Now, that's the current shortfall currently as of today. And as I mentioned, these pension promises, of course, have to be paid in the future. So what the future shortfall is going to be, that's a different question. And of course, that question, and there I agree with you, that's going to depend on how well the funds that are managed by the pension funds perform. But the key thing here is that nobody knows how much that's going to be. So when I'm mentioning the $500 billion shortfall, that's today, the present difference.
Mr. Chairman, again, can we just get our facts straight here? If I'm reading your thing right, your theoretical $500 billion is all three pension systems.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so when you're talking about CalPERS, which is the only pension system that Senator Hollingsworth bill applies to, your numbers are $239 million, if I am not misreading your study.
Billion or million?
Billion.
Billion. But it's not 5.
The unfunded liability for
One upper
CalPERS
cap.
that we came up with is
The unfunded
241
liability over
billion.
however many billions of years. But everybody keeps using that $500 billion number, and it's really $250 billion, if you will,
Okay.
on CalPERS.
Then to put
If
that
it's
in
only the CalPERS
perspective,
right.
SB 919 is estimated to take $110 billion off
Out of the 239.
off the
Got it,
unfunded
but it-
liability of the 239.
Okay, but I just,
So,
people keep tossing around the
110 out of
500 number.
239.
and
Yeah, I
it's
just-
confusing.
Lots of numbers here, folks. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Sure. So the point I was making is that, of course, the future, when these pension obligations actually come due in the future, the shortfall in the future, nobody knows, because nobody knows how well the funds are going to perform in the future. And what we also did in our study is that we ran analysis based on past performance, average returns, and standard deviations around those average returns, and we came out.
Over what time period?
25 years, going back to 84. Those are the only numbers available. The financial reports do not go back further. So we basically just use the numbers that are available in financial reports
Financial reports do not go back further.
than 84.
Easily accessible. You can go back into the old
Right, but
libraries
the
and
ones
look
that-
up the information, but that's where we used to do it.
There weren't any scribes available to hire.
That's right. That's right. No, they're there. They're not available online. You gotta go dig into those basement libraries. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I guess our point is that the 8% return assumption may very well be that they're going to earn 8% in perpetuity, but it may very well be they're going to be below 8%. So
Or
that's a
higher.
key aspect to understand.
Understand.
And we think in the current financial reporting stat that uncertainty is not accounted for. And we ran probability analysis of how likely that we think it's going to be that CalPERS is going to actually be able to pay their obligations. And that, for example, we think there is going to be a 60% chance that the amount that they're going to be short in the future is around $100 billion. So that's just one, but we ran.
in the future.
Well, so what
the
we
next
use
16 years.
16 years. 16 years is the average time by when pensions that CalPERS currently manages come due. So 16 years is the average of all pensions that are currently managed by CalPERS.
But let's not get too repetitive because I want to. Do we have anybody here from CalPERS? I do want to make sure that I presume this is your last witness. That we have CalPERS come up right after them to address some of these issues.
Sure. We're happy to respond also.
Thank you. Go ahead. Sir.
Thank you.
Oh, you done? Thank you very much. Again, congratulations. Good job.
Thank you. If you have any further
I
questions.
disagree
we'll
with
be
it,
happy
but it's a good job anyway.
What is it, Mr. Chairman, that you disagree with, that we have a contingent liability?
Oh, no, but as most of my discussion was based on the rate of return, which is the discount rate you use.
You know,
That's what I would disagree on.
The truth of the matter is, it doesn't make any difference what rate of return you use, as long as you fund it based upon whatever assumptions you're using.
Let me just make one closing remark. The reason why we discount at 4% is not because we think that that's the rate that they're going to earn in the future. It's because we think that rate best reflects the risk that is inherent to financial obligations, pension
you.
promises. That's the key to understand.
We do not dispute a rate of return when we came up with our $500 billion number or something. Like in those calculations, it's about what is the present value of the liability.
See, and I just got, and I'm going to have to ask CalPERS. We're going to ask the opposition to come up next.
Well, we got one
We've
more
got a few more.
support. I think.
Oh, one more in support. But the reason I'm asking is because I think over the last 30 years, and I'll ask CalPERS to, make it clear, I think the rate of return has been 7.9.
Correct. Right.
Okay. Thank you. Next witness in support.
Thank you. You're awfully young looking to be a,
The sergeant, from next time, I want you to check the IDs of everybody testifying. If they can't drink, they shouldn't be in. Never mind. Welcome, sir.
Mr. Chairman, how are you today?
Good.
Mr. Chairman, Bruce David Wolf with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and I'll be real brief in my comments.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We do believe that unfunded pension liabilities are one of the most serious issues California faces at the present time. the State Controller, John Chung, currently estimates unfunded healthcare liabilities at $52 billion, while regular pension liabilities are well over $60 billion. And I would just submit that was about the total of our general fund budget 3 years ago. And there's no way we're going to be able to increase taxes to cover that deficit. So the only way we're really going to confront this problem is by implementing either this bill or some sort of mandated defined contribution program. The LAO currently estimates right now that unfunded pension liabilities consume about 8% of the general fund revenues within the next 4 years or so. If you combine general obligation bond debt into that picture as well, that number balloons to about 16%. And as Mr. Crane and others alluded to in earlier testimony, that is money that's going to come off the top out of the general fund before other programs can be funded. And I think, frankly, that makes 30% fee increases for UC and CSU students look like a walk in the park. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. I mean, we do believe some more of these programs, corrections too, should be funded more efficiently, but we're not going to be able to do it if massive amounts of our budget is going towards unfunded pension liabilities and bond debt. It bears mentioning, too, that there is a massive unfunded liability in CalPERS and CalSTRS, and that could ultimately, Mr. Chair, lead to the public having to backfill public employee benefits. Unemployment right now is at a record 12.6%, and there's 2.3 million Californians out of work. And I would just argue you put the average taxpayer, as well as businesses in this state, in a very untenable position if you force them to backfill these liabilities because these pension funds have lost so much money that they may or may not get back. I mean, who knows what the stock market is going to do in the upcoming years. I wouldn't place a whole lot of good positive influence on equity funds, though. So
you're totally in cash and bonds? Is that what you're...
Mr. Chairman, leave it. Mr. Chairman, I'm young enough that, I hope over the next 40 years, these equity funds do improve a little bit. But yeah, if I was a little bit older, I would have some concerns. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just in closing, the private sector can't maintain these benefits. According to data from the Franchise Tax Board and the Board of Equalization, it takes 25 private sector employees to fund the average public sector employee. And we do believe that this benefit level is unsustainable when you look at the fact that the best and brightest individuals in California are leaving the state. There's a reason, I think, why we've lost 650,000 manufacturing jobs over the last decade, according to the California Manufacturers and Technology Association.
I'm going to ask you to just stay on point, because
Absolutely.
If you want to get into manufacturing policy and...
Well, and I'll wrap up, Mr. Chair. The point I'm making is we're losing private sector jobs, and when you look at that and you think about that, sustaining these pension benefits and being able to pay these off with the economy that we're looking at, it just strikes me as unsustainable. So with that, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Opposition or support?
Support.
Okay.
Larry Lees, County Administrative Officer for Shasta County, and I'm here where the rubber meets the road. I wanted to talk specifically to Section 35, and I'll be very brief. But Section 35 of this bill that gives the flexibility and authority to counties to bargain and negotiate some flexibility as it relates to post-health care benefits. And this is something that gives us the tools to help reduce our future costs. Senator Ducheney asked the question or mentioned about local bargaining and negotiating. I'm excited to say that within our bargaining units, the majority of our bargaining units have now agreed to some types of flexibility. However, PERS locks us out of providing that two-tiered system, and so we're continuing to look for support there. What we want to do is ensure the current level of benefits for the retirees and active employees while going after future cost. And again, this takes away no authority, no responsibility that counties and local bargaining units and labor partners have in negotiating these contracts. We still will have to do that. But Section 35 of this bill allows us the flexibility through adjustments in PERS to have that ability to control our own destiny. I have a term that I use in Shasta County. It's an acronym. It's BAU, BAW. I say no more BAW, no more BAW. It means business as usual. We cannot do that in the counties anymore because our debt is growing too much. Our post-employment benefit costs now are between $90 and $145 million, which is huge for Shasta County. Now, I know it's not big when you're talking about billions here as it relates to the state, but what we're looking for is not for the state to give us money, not to make cuts where it's appropriate, but to at least give us the flexibility so that we can control our own destiny. And Section 35 of this bill does that, and I appreciate your support for it.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support? Okay, witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, Terry Brennan on behalf of SEIU California. I want to start by addressing very quickly and briefly the Stanford report, and by quoting an article from Dr. Dean Baker, the co-founder of the Center on Economic Policy and Research, who's a doctorate in economics, who in his article said, the story of outside pension liabilities in this article, this referring to the Stanford study, is driven largely by a ridiculous assumption about pension returns. There's no reason whatsoever that the state of California should use a 4.14% discount rate in assuming its pension liabilities. This calculation would lead to an exaggerate the pension liabilities and therefore reasons to raise taxes, cut pensions, or cut others spending unnecessarily. He goes on to state that this might be the right investment approach for your 90-year-old grandmother, but it's not the right approach for a pension fund that invests over a 30-year horizon. There was a lot of talk earlier about context, and I want to put a little bit of context on what's happening to my members, both at in the state through Local 1000 and elsewhere. Currently, 75% of all CalPERS retirees earn a pension of less than $30,000 a year. As a matter of fact, the average of retirees last year, the last year they have information for, was $36,000 a year, slightly above $3,000 a month. The formula proposed in this bill would reduce that benefit by somewhere between 25 and 30%. If you do the math at even the 25% level, that reduces the average pension they would get now, were this law now, to less than $27,000 a year, or $1,000 below what the California Budget Project says is necessary to survive as a single person in California.
Be eligible for a healthy family.
Yeah, well, and it increased the cost of the state and to taxpayers. You're correct. In terms of another little bit of context, we talked about, I think Senator Duchesne mentioned giveaways that were given in the good times. The actuarial annual cost of SB 400 was $500 million a year. Seems like a lot of money. In those times we were doing well, very rich. During that same period, we gave out $12 billion a year in tax credits. So if we're going to compare to what happened to the private sector versus what public employees got, that was the trade-off, $500 million versus $12 billion in the same 3-year period. Let me talk a little bit, give a little context to the fiscal impact of this bill. They talked about this being necessary for down the road. They're correct. This does not provide any immediate budget relief. It will not put one new cop on the street, one new firefighter in a firehouse, one new teacher in the classroom, one new nurse in a hospital. It will take decades before you realize any savings from this. The actuarial evaluation from the originally introduced bill said the savings would be 1.5 to 2% in the miscellaneous category, my members. It would take 21 and a half years to achieve that savings fully. Based on last year's statistics, the average employee is working 21 and a half years to get that $30,000 benefit. They're also retiring on average at age 60, not age 55, not age 50. The average safety retiree is retiring at age 54, not age 50. I would refer you to a study, and I will get this to your offices, by Bob Brownstein from Working Partners USA. In that, he cites at least 12 academic studies, all demonstrating the failure of the two-tier system. And one of the main reasons it fails is it doesn't provide you any savings until you don't need them. When your times are tough, the market's down, you're laying off employees, there are no savings. By the time you demonstrated savings, the market's recovered, you're hiring employees, that's the only time you save under a two-tier. That's exactly the time that there's political pressure and pressure at the bargaining table to eliminate the second tier. And that's what's happened in virtually every case, both in the private sector with Hughes Aircraft, American Airlines, UPS, and in the public sector. I will make sure you get a copy of that so you can refer to it. What's really driving the increased pension funds? One more word about context. Everybody was talking about context. This 10-year graph is not context. CalPERS invests over a 30-year funding horizon. If you're going to compare what reality is, you need to look back 30 years. And the 30-year story is, from 1980 to 2010, we are today paying less as a percentage of payroll than we were in 1980. Got that? Less than we were in 1980. We've improved benefits. We've increased the funding level from what it was, roughly 55%, to 87% last year. It's a little bit lower this year. Yet we're paying less as a percentage of payroll. I wouldn't call that a crisis. I would call that a success story. There is a crisis. It's an economic crisis. What's driving the unfunded liability is the market returns, or lack thereof. It is that the increase you've seen over the last 10 years is a direct result of the market downturns. But that's not driven by the formulas. It's driven by Wall Street and the banks. If you're going to find a culprit here or a target here, it ought not to be the hardworking public employees. It ought to be the banks and Wall Street where it belongs. Thank you for your time. Urge no vote.
Questions from the committee?
Couldn't guess. And you want to see my ID?
No, sorry.
The beard. Put you over the top.
No comment. Other witnesses in...
Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members, Wayne Quint. I'm the president of the California Coalition of Law Enforcement Associations. I'm also representing here today the Sacramento County Deputy Sheriff's Association, as well as the Association of Orange County Deputy Sheriffs. I will tell you in advance I am no pension expert, but I will tell you this. For those of you that know about the County of Orange, we have great experience on why we must strongly oppose SB 919, and I think it completely eliminates collective bargaining out of this whole process. It sets in stone rates that the Honorable Senator thinks are reasonable at this time, but let me give a few examples in Orange County where they weren't. As you all know, in 1994, Orange County filed and was granted the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of the United States at that time.
That's right.
We were paying on debt, or supposed to, until 2024. But because there was flexibility in paying down that debt, we are actually going to pay that debt down 8 years earlier in 2016. Working men and women made great sacrifices during that period. It was done through collective bargaining. Did it change throughout the years when the elected officials who we negotiate with saw improvements in interest rates? Yes, it did. I can tell you in 2000, our Board of Supervisors gladly said, if you don't take a 4% raise, and at that time we were paying 9% into pensions, we'll pay for your pensions. And it was the best deal for this Board of Supervisors at the time. Flexibility through collective bargaining at the local issue. Now, granted, we're a 37 Act, but I have state employees represented in CCLEA, and this is where this should be taking place, respectfully, is at the collective bargaining issue. Just recently, 4 months ago, AOCDS, through the collective bargaining unit with our Board of Supervisors, agreed to, once again, begin paying in towards pensions. We also did start another tier.
Say that again.
Just within the last 4 months, AOCDS agreed with our Board of Supervisors that my collective bargaining unit would begin paying a certain percent towards pensions, 1% in 10, 2% in 11, 2% in 12. Even though, and this is where the flexibility works on both sides, even though in 2000 the Board of Supervisors said give up a 4% raise and we don't want you paying into the pensions. So this bill I've got real problems, and we must oppose it because we believe improvements, recognition at certain times should be allowed to take through collective bargaining, and this bill does not allow for it. And yes, I'm sure they're going to say, well, you're 37 Act, but I'm telling you, there will be a trickle down. So another area, and I know you want us to stay focused on the bill, was what we did with health care. And we basically went to a defined contribution. That's not a one-size-fits-all. Some places have a great defined benefit. My point, again, we need to oppose this bill because it completely takes collective bargaining. And that, in my opinion, is where all the improvements are always made with the respective groups. And I think it's telling when I think everyone but one bargaining unit in the state are not getting this done through collective bargaining. So we are respectfully opposing it. I ask and respectfully ask this entire committee to look at some of the Orange County models and what we've done. You're going to hear, I believe, from our non-safety employee general manager, who's going to tell you the same thing, through collective bargaining, improvements for both sides. We're urging a respectful no on this vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Further opposition to the bill?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm John Hamm. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the California Association of Highway Patrolmen, and I'm here to urge a no vote. And I'll keep it very brief also. We have already signaled that we're willing to negotiate. We're waiting for the administration. And as evidence of our willingness to negotiate, we negotiated pre-funding of retiree health care, and that was at our own coming to the administration willing to do it. We're willing to come to the table, and we're just waiting for the other side, and the other side's the administration. So we are stating that let collective bargaining, like Wayne says.
That was my point. Did Mr. Crane leave? Too bad.
But that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamm. Next, opposition.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Christy Baumer representing the California Professional Firefighters. I also see no need to repeat a lot of the policy issues that Mr. Brennan brought up. I heard several times that we're seeking here through this bill to align ourselves with the private sector. And what we're seeing in the private sector is retirees in poverty, or retirees having to return to work, or retirees having to move in with their children. And so I don't need to tell the members of this committee this, but I'll just say it anyway, which is, who are we trying to model and why? You have a sustainable system that provides a secure benefit to those who dedicate their life to public service, including the 30,000 members of my organization that perform firefighting in the state. And we spend a lot of time quoting a gentleman. This whole debate sort of caught fire when a CalPERS actuary said that this system is unsustainable. So what I'll remind you is that I was in a meeting in 2000 with that same actuary where we were imploring that CalPERS establish a structure whereby they require a minimum contribution from employers. He said, we will never be able to spend all the money we have on benefits. The same guy who nobody would listen to, and now suddenly his statement about the system being unsustainable is God's honest truth.
Who's that?
Mr. Sealing, the former CalPERS actuary. And so specifically to this bill and to my firefighters, you talk about raising a retirement age. Your own Commission on Health and Safety and Workers' Compensation says that workers' compensation benefits, injuries on the job of firefighters quadruple between the ages of 55 and 60. So just by asking them to stay on the job 2 years longer and increasing their retirement age, you will probably bear extra costs in your work comp system by dragging these gentlemen and ladies to work when they've been injured on the job. And I think I'll just close with suggesting that, you know, the premier witness at the beginning of this testimony was imploring you to look at all the information, and yet half his arguments gave you half the information. He talked about how the employers bear all the risk, but you all recounted how they also bear all the benefit, which is, you know, you can call it payment holidays, or you can call it, I'm going to make my payments from my savings account, with the money that's accrued in our employer accounts. Pay our contributions out of that. Don't ask us to send us any more money. So those holidays have a lot to do with the crisis we're in now. So let's definitely demand disclosure, but let's be consistent with our facts. Let's protect what you have provided to public servants of the state, and we ask for you to oppose this bill.
Other witnesses in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Ron Cottingham, President of the Peace Officers Research Association of California, representing over 850 public safety associations throughout the state of California and actually into Nevada.
I meant witnesses in opposition.
I'm sorry.
My apologies.
I guess I missed that myself. I'm sorry. It should be clear that we are here in opposition to SB 919, no matter what the chair may say. Yeah. And getting back to this, so we represent over 850 public safety associations throughout the state of California and actually into Nevada. But as part of my background and experience, besides being president of PORAC and working 35-plus years for the San Diego Sheriff's Department, I spent 1 year. You indicated that this may be one of the few times that this is debated, this issue is debated in the legislature. I spent 1 year on the Public Employees Post-Employment Benefits Commission that was created by executive order of Governor Schwarzenegger. People were appointed through the Senate, through the Assembly, and through the governor himself. The chairman of that commission was Gerald Parsky, who was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger. We spent 1 year, one solid year, traveling around the state of California as a commission, as a body, hearing public testimony throughout California. What we heard consistently from every representative of local government and state negotiators were that this is an issue that belongs at the bargaining table. That message was held consistent and was very clear throughout all the testimony and throughout every hearing we had. So we honored that when we put our report together and presented that, I believe, on January 8th of 2008 to Governor Schwarzenegger. It is a complex issue when you look at all the retirement systems we have and that are managed in California, not just through the special districts, but through the colleges, but through the local government and the state government that is managed by CalPERS, and we have 2037 acts and a variety of charter cities throughout the state that are also managed. We determined that you must take a long-term perspective. A 10-year chart doesn't cover it. That's why when Mr. Brennan testified, he testified to the fact that CalPERS uses a 30-year projective. All the debt and all the unfunded liability, one of the things that wasn't pointed out is that those are 30-year projections. Anything can happen in that time period. That's required by GASB to report those out 30 years. In 30 years, a lot of things can happen. The market can go up. Payments can go up.
Explain that to me. What do you mean GASB requires 30-year?
GASB 45 and 43 came in a few years ago.
Yes.
And when they came in, it required that instead of just being a footnote in your audit, you had to fully report your debt. And in fully reporting
disclose your unfunded liabilities.
Yeah, fully disclose that. And when you did that had to be put into your report.
And when was that?
That came out approximately 1998. 99. It came out earlier than it was actually adhered to because everybody was confused.
Came out in a certain year, then it took a few years to implement.
It took a few years to implement. Actually, the GASB panel, people representing GASB testified in front of our commission. In fact, the first hearing we had in Sacramento. And my direct question to them was, does anybody understand the GASB reporting requirements? And the representative said, no, California is the first group, and this was in 2007, to really start to try to get a handle on what it does.
2007.
2007.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I remember a lot of discussion with this National Conference of State Legislators and Council of State Governments forums where all of the states were trying to figure out how do we now think about this, and everybody, because the way they changed the rule and the reporting changed, suddenly everybody showed unfunded liabilities under the new way of doing the reporting, and everybody was struggling with how to figure out, how you now do your bonds and stuff, because it was going to be a problem. But that was not very long ago. That might have been around that
So
time.
essentially what you have is accounting changes that affected as well the reporting and the...
Yeah. I mean, they may not be wrong in terms of where you're going,
liabilities.
but the regulations on it, I think, I'm not sure regulations were out on it. I think that was the problem. The federal government hadn't figured out how to do the regs in a way that
Plus, there were
states could
several
comply with.
timelines. There were graduated timelines of when certain entities, depending on what your income or revenue was, had to report. With the state revenue being one of the highest and had to be one of the first to report. Local governments, depending on funding or revenue, were subject to later reporting requirements. But everybody was trying to get ahead of the curve. The one thing that they pointed out was that they weren't requiring that you did anything proactively about your unfunded liability at the time. You had to report it and had to show that you had a plan. So that's what kind of skewed everything and started everything kind of rolling downhill at that time. One of the other things that we came up with in the study was reported that the healthy system requires regular payments, that there should be no more pension holidays. A quote from that book that was published by the commission from our commissioner, or our chairman, Gerald Parsky, is, with respect to funding these critical benefits, it is important to emphasize that each public agency in California faces different funding constraints, personal needs, and organizational purposes. A one-size-fits-all approach is neither appropriate nor practical, and that came from the commission that was created by executive order of the governor at that time, and that was after a year-long study as to the approach to the pension system and what we could do in California. And again, it goes back to what has been said before, that all of these issues belong at the bargaining table. And what has been forgotten, I don't know that it has been mentioned. SB 400, the genesis of SB 400 started at the bargaining table. It was bargained for first, but needed changes. Those changes had to be done legislatively. So after it was bargained for, it was brought to the state, to the legislature, to create those formulas. This is being done backwards, where it is being put before the legislature, before units have been able to come to the table and bargain for anything and acquiesce or make concessions, as you just heard John Hamm, Executive Director of the California Association of Highway Patrolmen, testify to that fact, that they are willing to make concessions. Governance and transparency was discussed here by David Crane, and at the end of the Commission's report, the Commission put forward 2 bills to the legislature, which both bills passed, because we realized in the testimony that we heard, one of the things that was obfuscating everything was that you could take the same set of numbers from one system, transfer them to another system, and the way that they reported those numbers, you could not get the same picture of viability from either system. So we wanted governance, we wanted proper governance, and we wanted transparency to the point where no contract could be brought out in front of the approving board, the appointing body, and approved on a consent calendar. It had to have an actuarial study behind it. It had to have public comment, and it had to be shown that it was sound before anything could go forward to enhance any type of benefit or to change benefits. And that would be whether it was pensions or health care, because health care was part of that research. And again, those are passed, and they went on to be in law now. It was interesting to note at the same time when we gave that report to the governor that sadly the governor immediately discounted the report and decided not to make the full payment through the budget to the pension system. So once again, it was underfunded, thereby causing more problems. When we get back to, I'm going to kind of change gears a little bit and go into collective bargaining, because we've talked a lot about that. When I found out I was asked to testify, and this bill was coming up, I sent a blast email out to our member associations, and within a couple of days, I got hundreds of responses. It's already been discussed that this bill does nothing now to fix the budget. It does nothing now to fix the financial situation in California or any local government. The only thing that can fix it, and is currently fixing it, is collective bargaining. And I have reports from all over this state of associations, both public safety sworn and non-sworn, that have gone back to the table. Some were not even in a negotiating period. They offered to go back to the table and negotiate with their employing entity and make concessions. And those concessions range anywhere from 2.5% of pay given up to 20% of pay given up. Those concessions have ranged from paying for your pension obligation, either the lowest being 1.5%, the highest in a few areas being 100%, where the employees have come back and agreed to pay 100% of their pension obligations.
Let me be clear on that. So you're talking collective bargaining. A lot of your members are now moving ahead. Outcome, 2.5% to 25% reduction in pay. So this affects long-term liability or current budget?
It affects the current budget, and it's up to the employing entity.
How is that?
Because it lowers the payroll. It lowers the payroll burden to the employer. And when they do that, it also lowers the pension obligation, because the pension obligation is based on salary. So it lowers that. That can be, and some of these contracts are 3 to 5 year contracts to lock everything in place. And that's on the pension benefit. That includes the health care. That includes furloughs. That includes groups giving up holiday pay. That include groups giving up overtime. So these fixes are being made at the table, where they can be made with swiftness and celerity, where they are going forward, and it is saving their local government money, and those same opportunities are here for the state. In fact, maybe the state has done that vicariously by not negotiating with any of its bargaining units and not granting any raises over the last few years. They are keeping their payroll static. When you do that, you lower your pension obligation. You lower the payment you have to make to the system. And that's now, and that's in real dollars. And that gives us the opportunity everywhere to go back to the table and to do these things. Nobody wants to be the cause of any local government or state government failing. However, it seems that public employees are in the bullseye, because that's who everybody is focusing on. And again, as Mr. Brennan has testified, public employees did nothing to cause the market crash. We did nothing to cause the real estate bubble to burst. We did nothing to cause the risky schemes created by the insurance industry and the banking industry to bankroll subprime loans and things like that. We surely did not convince Goldman Sachs to go into the creative financing that they did and went into. But that caused everything to crash, and it's not a siloed crash like it was in 2003, where it was the tech bubble, or 2000 to 2003. This is global, and now it's happening again because of what's going on in Greece. Well, surely you can't blame California employees for what's going on in Greece, but that is the reality. We get blamed for it. The public seems to forget that we are taxpayers, and they seem to forget that we also are obligated to pay part of our pension payment. So we pay twice. The taxpayer may pay once. We are taxpayers. We pay a second time when we give up benefits to pay for pensions. So my organization, years ago, our employer came to us and said, "We will pay your pension obligation." And we said, fine. Our pension obligation at that time was 9.5%. Well, in paying that, they used to give us the 9.5%, then they would take it off. They just now don't give it to us, and they take it off. So that did two things for them also. That lowered our pay, because now there's 9.5% that's not put on our pay, and that is in perpetuity from 1980 on. And it lowered their pension obligation to us by 9.5%, because that's 9.5% less payroll that they had to make a payment on. So when we do these things and we give up things, people forget to look and project that goes on into the future. The 9.5% that we gave up in 1980, we never built on that. So if I'm not an actuary, I'm not a good mathematician, but I'm sure there's a way to find out how much we have saved the county of San Diego over the 30-plus years since that went on in lowering our benefit by 9.5%. And we've made other concessions. And we recently, my organization, Deputy Sheriff's Association of San Diego County, recently did go back to the table and agree to no raises, carry the contract out for 3 years with a small raise on the back end of it, I think 2%, and agree to allow the county to go in for local government to adjust new hires to a 3% at 55 benefit with 3-year average, so that would save them more money. So again, we employees have come forward to be part of the solution and not part of the problem, and we are seeing that happen throughout California. And I'm seeing that happen. It's verifiable with my members, and I know if Christy Bowman from Firefighters had addressed the same issue, she could tell you, because I have a report from firefighters, that they are doing the same thing throughout the state of California. So we urge a no vote on this bill. We think it is not necessary in the state at this time, not until you go back to the table with these groups, the state groups, and negotiate the benefit. And we know what happens in the state groups will trickle down to the local government, and this will become the standard. And it puts everybody in, again, a one-size-fits-all solution, which everybody so far has said that does not work.
Mr. Cunningham, if I may, later on, I'd like to, without revealing any confidential information, and I'd love to, if you can, give me a list of some of these, not the names, but just the percentages, who's the number of individuals actually negotiating down right now the existing pay and benefits to see how that's affecting the existing budgets throughout the state.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to look at some of that.
Okay.
Data. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Denise?
No, it's 10 to 5.
Craig Brown, California Correctional Peace Officers Association. When this administration came to us right after they took office, they told us they needed $100 million out of our payroll.
Wait, hold up, Mr. Brown. You represent who, Mr. Brown?
California Correctional Peace Officers Association. We, the governor approached us and said he needed $100 million out of our payroll. He would engage in bargaining. He did engage in bargaining. He did get $100 million out of our payroll. We are not engaged in bargaining. Mr. Crane's definition of vigorous bargaining isn't the same as our definition of vigorous bargaining, I assure you. And we're opposed to this bill. It belongs at the table.
Questions?
Would your response have been the same when you were the director of finance?
Yes, it would have. It belonged to the table. We did everything through the table.
right.
When I was director of finance, we used the table.
I just asked the question. It's either,
No, but
it's either a yes or no, Mr. Brown. And you and I have known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
I just asked the question. You just need to respond yes or no.
Yes.
Well, just to make that point, because it goes to something we talked about earlier, it was done. We have done these various things. I think Mr. Cunningham's description also is descriptive of some of the things that happened at the state. It's my understanding, I mean, although Senator Hollingsworth's bill is trying to make it an absolute rule on the 3-year thing, all but 3 bargaining units in the state already have that because they have bargained it that way. I mean, it's sort of moving in that direction. And back when, once upon a time, the last time CCPOA had a contract, there was these sorts of trade-offs that said, we're not going to take salaries now, we'll take them later. You know, we're going to contribute more to pensions. I think UC is finally, their employees are going to start paying into their pension in ways that they haven't in the past. This year, everybody is doing all of these different things. And when you say they came in, there hasn't been a contract. CCPOA has been without a contract 5-6 years now, right?
It was done, I believe, within a year of the governor taking office.
In 2003, but it expired in 2005 or 6?
Expired by 2005, correct.
2005. I mean, I know there hasn't been a contract for
We have not had a
at least
contract since
5 years.
2005. That's correct.
Since 2005.
Other witnesses in opposition?
Oh, Nick Berardino, General Manager, Orange County Employees Association. We are here, obviously, in opposition. I just wanted to briefly share with the committee that we in Orange County, obviously coming from a very conservative jurisdiction and one that we have folks pounding on the pension issue on a daily basis. I recognize what some of the issues were and some of the problems. It's also a county that, went bankrupt, as Mr. Quint indicated earlier. And we came together just recently to work on a solution through the collective bargaining process. And I think that's the key element here is, working through the collective bargaining process. That process was developed and the process is designed so that ultimately the parties can reach a solution. What we were able to do is negotiate a settlement that resulted in a hybrid plan, and that hybrid plan provides a defined benefit at 1.62% at 65 and a defined contribution benefit where the employer will match up to 2% of an employee's contribution. And in order to do that, we had to come before this legislature to allow employees to do that, because the way this plan works is new employees have a choice of going to the 2.7 at 55 or the lower plan. But if employees choose to go to the higher benefit plan, it costs them significantly more money than if they go to the lower plan. But it gives them an opportunity to make that choice upon hiring, and it allows current employees to make that choice. So it's a very creative program, and a program we had to come before this legislature in order to allow it to be implemented. And this legislature, both Republicans and Democrats, voted in favor of that program. And since that program has been in place, there were some tax issues with current employees reducing. So we've been in Washington working on with the IRS. We're very close to getting an IRS ruling allowing the current employees to do this. But we have had numerous other public jurisdictions who have gone to Washington kind of weighing in terms of supporting this type of program as well as the UC system. So it is really through a bipartisan effort that we were able to achieve this program, and it was through the collective bargaining process, which has been around since the 1600s, and it has a process that has proven through time to be able to work with developing solutions to many difficult kinds of problems. And Senator, you carried that legislation for us. Of course, at first there's a lot of trepidation because it was change. But people's comfort level, certainly on our side of the aisle here, I think we're relieved because it was through collective bargaining. And in our jurisdiction, which has 5 Republicans on the board, very, very conservative Orange County Republicans, including John Morlock, who is, kind of nationally known on these pension issues, he also voted for this. So I think it's not an esoteric argument or an exercise, but it's proven in fact that significant creative change can take place through the collective bargaining process. And for that reason, we would not be supporting this bill and urge you not to do so.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Other witnesses in support, sir? Opposition?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members, Aaron Reed, I want to identify with the comments of Nick Berardino because I've represented proudly OCEA for 20 years, and also with the comments of John Hamm. I've represented that association for 31 years, and with the Peace Officers Research Association of California as well, 15 years plus. All of them had a common denominator, and that's that this is negotiable and we can work these things out. So on behalf of some of my other clients who are not here today, couldn't be here, but the California Association of Professional Scientists, the CDF firefighters, CAL FIRE firefighters, professional engineers in California government, all of them are willing to negotiate these matters, but they've not had an opportunity to do so yet. So I want to say that we can find creative solutions, and you've heard of a perfect example of that even required legislation to be passed. It was that novel of an idea that there was no statute to cover that particular situation in Orange County. Another thing, other witnesses have mentioned it, but this whole notion that we've got this huge crisis right now, we really do, I agree with the other witnesses, have to take a little bit longer view. When you go back to 2000 and the employer rate was virtually zero for many classifications, we were at an all-time record low. And so it's not exactly fair to say that the employer rate has gone up 2,000% since that time. While it might be factual, it's misleading, because if you use a mirror, you'll see that chart in reverse the previous 10 years. For example, in the decade prior to, I've got to take out my glasses now because I can't read my own writing. But in the decade prior to what the chart depicts, we saw the miscellaneous rate in 89-90 at 13%, but it dropped down.
I can't.
It dropped down to zero. It came down to zero.
Stay up there now. Just kidding.
It went to zero. And many classes in many different areas were low. And your state safety, the employer saves all of Social Security costs because they're not in Social Security. So there's a whole, close to 7% that the employer doesn't pay because they're not in Social Security. But we believe all of these things need to be factored in. And you do need to take a longer view. I was tempted to get into the Stanford report, but I think I'll leave that for the PERS witnesses because they have their actuaries and they're more expert. But so I'll just resist the temptation because I know it's almost 5 o'clock.
So if you can just clarify for me, Mr. Ham with the CHP mentioned that he had offered already some negotiating points with the administration.
That's correct, and so has the CAL FIRE CDF firefighters.
Are they currently engaged or want to be engaged?
They want to be engaged. They want to be engaged. They're eagerly awaiting that opportunity to do that. And it's not that, I mean, we still believe that, this storm will eventually pass, and we're sort of in an awkward position. We're sort of kicked right now while we're down. But even saying that, these groups are willing to make some adjustments. But when you just do it for one group, the state, and then you leave the 37 Act counties and the university and all the other employers out there, I think Senator Ducheney said it early and said it best. It leaves the state of California as the least attractive employer, and it means that our talented law enforcement, firefighters, engineers, and scientists would be better off going to work for local government. In almost every case, they're better off going to work at local government. Pay, benefits, retirement, in all those categories. So is that the kind of employer you want the state to be?
Thank you very much. Somebody might, too bad Mr. Crane didn't stick around to hear how vigorously the governor is bargaining. I mean, we ask this question every week in subcommittee, and he should hear it. I mean, and it's obvious that there hasn't been, and obviously poisoning the well with the SEIU 1000 contract last year was part of it. All right, who's next?
Madam Chair and members, I'm Kobe Pizzotti with California Statewide Law Enforcement Association, representing 7,000 public safety professionals in bargaining unit 7. We too oppose this bill. Mr. Reed actually just stole my thunder. We believe that our members deserve the pensions that they get. They do dangerous jobs. However, we believe the bargaining table is the place to negotiate all wages and benefits, and we have the maximum ability to have flexibility there. Also, Mr. Reed mentioned, the state actually saves money by paying these pensions instead of having to pay into Social Security. So, with that, we'd like to say we oppose the bill.
Thank you.
Hi, Madam Chair. Scott Adams with AFSCME. We have about 100,000 members in the state of California in a variety of pension systems, from CalPERS, state employees, to the UC system, and various city and county funds up and down the state. We, too, oppose this bill. And, as you look at it, there are 3 ways that pension benefits are adjusted. By legislation, by bargaining, and by initiative. And we feel bargaining is the right way to go. After being asked to come here, I just made some quick calls around the state to our affiliates and found out, asked, what are you doing with pensions? In Menlo Park, where there's actually been an initiative filed that would affect only miscellaneous employees, and there's no Social Security there, this initiative would put in a 2 at 60 funding mechanism. But what our folks did for a 2-year contract that will goes through October of 2011 is our folks are now paying 8%. The city's paying about 13.67%. And if it goes up about, if the employer's contribution goes up 2%, our folks are going to share the burden 50-50. So that's one way to look at it, and that's what collective bargaining did. In Carson, we had negotiated a multiplier 3 at 60, and the new multiplier is going to be 2.7 at 55. In Midway City, we had negotiated 2.7 at 55 for new employees. It's going to be 2 at 55. And San Diego, which gets a lot of ink as being known as the Enron by the Sea, our employees were always making their contributions, and the city decided to do some sports facilities and convention centers and not pay into the fund. We initially, in dealing with a quick, in 2005, our folks took a 6% pay cut to leverage that money to go into the pension system. We also, retirees gave up the 13th check, and the drop program, supplemental program, was eliminated as short-term fixes. There was an initiative that was passed in San Diego that changed the composition of the board, but unlike David Crane saying we should get rid of plan participants, even in San Diego, they kept plan participants who put their money into the system on the board. There's been a new contract. There was a threat of initiative to deal with benefits again, and nobody really wanted an initiative. The mayor didn't want one. The city, it was going to cost the city money, and we all came to the table and negotiated a new contract. The cap of a salary went for new employees as of July 1st of last year, went from 90% to 80%. The average salary went from 1 year to 3 years, and this other supplemental program was changed dramatically. The city and the employee would put in 3%, and there could be an optional match of 3% if the employee put in, the employer had to put in. So that's 6%. It's now in a defined contribution program where there's a 1% employee-employer, saving the city a lot of money. This new the contract is estimated to save the city $23 million over the next 20 years. So it's short. It's quick fixes. The multipliers also changed dramatically, from 2 at 55 to 1 at 55, from 2.55 at 60 to 2 at 60, and from 2.8 at 65 to 2.6 at 65. So we have found up and down the state, in cities, we're bargaining, we're addressing it, we're hearing what the employer has to say, and we're having fixes that work. And what I talked about was just on the pension side. There's all, as you heard before, there are bargaining with wages and benefits and all that. But this is specifically what our members have done to address pension funding issues.
Good afternoon.
There's opposition. Go ahead, ma'am.
Jennifer Baker with the California Teachers Association in opposition. This measure would decimate the already very dismal salaries that so many school employees face when they retire, because the salaries are not extremely competitive looking at so many other areas, particularly in deference to the services that they provide for our children. And not only that, they're being impacted in addition by the furloughs, and they're being squeezed by education cuts. So this simply exacerbates the cuts that are already being faced, would not provide any type of an adequate retirement security. And we respectfully urge your opposition.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Jai Sukhprasad with the California School Employees Association. We represent more than 220,000 classified school employees that make our school run. And I won't repeat all the oppositions that have been made so far, just to note that despite of the worst market downturn that we've had, despite of this downturn, CalPERS is much better funded today than they were 30 years ago, despite of that market downturn. So when Mr. Brennan said earlier, this is a success story that we're able to provide these kind of benefits for my members who make very little, less than the $2,000 per person on average to get from CalPERS. Please don't do anything to erode it. We would ask you to oppose and vote no on this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Afrak Vargas. I'm with the California State Firefighters Association, and I believe that Senator DeCheney said it best about 3.5 hours ago. This bill is just flatly not needed. This is something that could be negotiated, and we'd respectfully request a no vote. Thank you.
Dolores Sanchez, representing the California Federation of Teachers. We represent the classified school employees in the PERS system. They are among the lowest paid school employees. They have the lowest pensions in PERS. They take home all of a whopping $1,400 a month. That's their average pension takeout. And so we believe that this bill, would further erode that. And, we would ask you to please vote no.
Andrea York on behalf of FAC, joining the faculty are joining with the classified employees in solidarity and urging your opposition.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Sherry Golden, representing the California State University Employees Association. They are 40,000 strong, and they bargain with the trustees. So this bill really just kind of circumvents what they're doing right now. They worked out furloughs at the bargaining table. They're in bargaining now, so they are very much opposed to this and would prefer to work this out with the trustees during their regular bargaining session. The supervisors, which we represent about 34,000 supervisors, do not have collective bargaining. They have a meet and confer process, which really doesn't particularly work very well, but the last couple of meetings they've had with the Department of Personnel Administration, I don't think this item's been discussed. A lot of the meetings get canceled, so the door is open there for the supervisors to go in and discuss this and see if things can't be worked out. So we request that you oppose this bill and let the process work as it should. Thank you.
Thank you.
Liberty Sanchez on behalf of Laborers Locals 777 and 792. My employees, similarly to those witnesses previously testifying, are also negotiating concessions at the bargaining table to provide for immediate economic relief in this time of economic crisis. I might suggest, if you're looking for immediate relief, turning down the air conditioning in here for large cost savings.
Actually, the heater's on.
Oh, really? So we are opposed for the reasons previously stated. Thank you.
It is very cold. You're supporting it? No, you're opposing. Smart metering.
Mr. Chair and members, Caitlin Vega for the California Labor Federation. I just reiterate, we are hearing from all of our unions up and down the state that they are addressing these issues at the local level through collective bargaining, and we think that that's the appropriate way to do this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and member Shane Gussman on behalf of the Teamsters, the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers, Local 21, the California Conference of Machinists, and the Amalgamated Transit Union, all in opposition for all of the reasons stated.
Thank you. Other opposition? Now we're going to hear from CalPERS.
You need to speak a little faster.
You want me to speak faster? Do you want the witnesses, all of us, speak faster? Again, I hear you. It's an important issue, so I want to make sure we have a full hearing on this.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Pat Mock, Danny Brown, and Alan Milligan from the CalPERS staff. We're here to answer your questions today, but we thought we would, in the interest of good information flow, provide you with a short fact sheet on some of the things that we have seen out there that have been stated, so that you could see from CalPERS' perspective some of the facts as we see it. And there are just four main facts really we wanted to share with you today. The first is that there's been much said about the so-called increase of 2,000% in the last 10 years. We think that it should be noted that if you looked at the previous 10-year period from that, you'd see kind of the mirror opposite image. The state's revenues rose 60% during that period of time, while pension costs fell by 80%. And secondly, we wanted to share with you that as a matter of a percent of payroll cost, you can see the figures here. It shows that state miscellaneous back in 81 was 19.5%, and even as of today, it's still much lower. So that kind of supports some of the points that folks have been making here today. And also, I won't go over all of this. However, I did want to point out that on the Stanford study, we were very surprised by the study. We think that it has failed to take into account the reality of our investment performance. And as you know, in the past 20 years, we have earned an average annual investment return of 7.9%. And this study ignores our diversified investment portfolio, which has proven to be time-tested. And finally, as our interim chief actuary, Alan Milligan, can attest, we must follow the requirements of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, as well as the actuaries adhere to the actuarial standards of practice. And so for these two reasons, that is what guides us in our accounting disclosures in our comprehensive financial annual report. So with that, I want to thank you for giving us the time to be here today to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the committee? I have a very quick question, which is on the Stanford study. We heard very good testimony from the students on the study that they believe that risk-free rate was 4% should be used as opposed to the rate that you're using. How do you address that? I mean, should you be using that risk-free rate, or should you stick to what your rate of return, your assumption are right now?
I would like to ask Alan to respond to CCR.
Alan Milligan, Interim Chief Actuary at CalPERS. I guess one of the things that we have to do more than just prepare papers, we actually have to fund the system. And it's absolutely critical in terms of funding the system to know how you're investing the assets of the fund. A 4% discount rate, 4.14% discount rate, would be an appropriate discount rate if we were actually funding the system using treasuries, 10-year treasuries. But it's not an appropriate discount rate to be using when you're funding the system using a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds and other real estate. So not only do I think it's inappropriate, it would actually also be a violation of the actuarial standards of practice if I was to prepare my actuarial evaluation on the basis of that discount rate. And it would also, we could not use that number in terms of our accounting disclosures, our comprehensive annual financial report. It's not permitted under governmental accounting standards. So I think that pretty much says it in terms of, is it appropriate to use it? Well, how could it be appropriate when, it would be a violation of standards?
Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing is that I think what we're saying is we can't use it as a substitute. It couldn't be a substitute. Using the Stanford approach could not be used as a substitute.
Why?
But because of what you're saying about because of the requirement of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, as well as the actuarial standards.
Is that a legal accounting requirement? Guideline? What is it?
It is the statement of it is
Generally
the financial
accepted
the governmental accounting
practices.
standards, generally accepted accounting principles for governments include this. You could prepare it on the basis of not doing this. I think actually Texas talked about doing something like that and was kind of laughed at a few years ago. We comply with governmental accounting standards, as does the state of California in preparing their financial statements.
Well, let me ask you then, that Stanford study talked about $500 billion. Any thoughts on that? The whole system being underfunded by $500 billion?
As of June 30th, 2008, the state's share of the CalPERS unfunded liability was about $16.2 billion. That's not including any unfunded liability with respect to UC or STRS.
What about health?
But you're not going to get to $500 billion.
Does that include the health?
No, that does not.
Okay. Just trying to separate those. So the health unfunded liability is the one a lot of us have been worried about for a while.
Right. I believe
that one's real unpredictable because we don't know how much health care is going to cost. But I mean, then that's been a hard one to get our hands around. But.
Yes, absolutely. The actuaries who prepared that valuation report actually work for the State Controller's Office, not for CalPERS, and they use similar discount rates to what we're using. Actually, no, they don't, because that's not funded. Right. What they say is, if it was funded, then you would have a liability base like this, using discount rates similar to ours, because it's not funded.
Have you had a chance to review Senate Bill 919 and its assumptions of saving $110 billion? Have you had a chance to run an analysis on this bill?
No, we have not done a savings analysis on this bill. I am somewhat surprised, I think, at the level of savings that are quoted, and I guess I'd really like to sort of understand the assumption about salary growth, et cetera, that was used in calculating those savings.
When could the gentleman have those numbers for the committee?
Oh, I was going to add something to Alan, but it wasn't to answer that the Senator Cox's question.
Go ahead, add whatever you wish.
We need to answer his question. Is it possible to produce the data that you just said?
We can come up with a savings estimate. One of the difficulties with that is any savings estimate for something like this really requires an assumption about the growth in the state workforce.
Yeah, but everything that's done with respect to pension calculations is based upon some sort of assumption that has to do with the rate of interest that you're projecting.
Could we come up with something and just give us some of the best assumptions that we come up with?
Yeah, we can come up with something.
Who's going to get it? How long are they going to get it for? What's the interest rate going to be? What's the current contingent liability? What do you have to do to pay it down? What's the increase in compensation? This stuff probably is rocket science, but this is stuff
that they do on a daily basis, not us, of course.
This would require us to make an assumption that we do not normally make. Normally when we do our actuarial work, we do not have to make an assumption about future growth in the workforce. And so we assume that it's zero.
What is the Bill's number, Senator Hollingsworth, assume for future growth in the workforce? Just use apples to apples.
I'm
I
not
don't
sure.
know that.
We asked PERS to analyze the bill, and we did not get the information back from them in time.
Oh, okay.
But we did. The $110 billion is from the Department of Finance's numbers.
Well, maybe we could find out from finance what assumptions they use. So even if we disagree with the assumptions, we could use the same ones for the
I was
comparison.
just informed that we assume that the Department of Finance has based the $110 billion that the state workforce basically stays the same size as what it is today.
Forever?
It's comparable.
At its lowest level in
It's comparable to what
50 years?
Well, then the savings would be even greater.
But we're currently at such a low level that that's a tough.
And the liability would be greater, and the savings from this bill would be greater in the out years.
Let me ask you just a
Oh, I see. You hire more people.
last couple of days, there's been some SACB articles about these huge losses you've taken in some of your real estate plays. Do they add to the woes of CalPERS, or is it just the other side of investing in real estate in all those years and getting those high rates of return? Is that a blip in your billion-dollar losses? In my book, more than a blip, but what's your thought on that?
Any loss obviously does impact the funded status of CalPERS and has an implication about future contribution levels. You cannot invest the way we do without running a risk of losing on some investments. But we think overall we've got the right assumption about our discount rate. We think that we're doing the right thing with respect to how we're investing. So yes, it is the flip side.
Incidentally, our rate of return for year-to-date is 12%, and it's more than that for the 12-month period ended in February. So the
you've had a 12% rate of return in this environment?
Yes, so far.
Yeah,
Yes.
but
That's for the 1 year.
Surprising in today's marketplace.
Over the last 12 months?
This has been the lowest market.
Well, actually, for the last 12 months, year-to-date, last 12 months we've had a 22%, but keep in mind we've had a 300% drop here in the last week. So it does fluctuate. I think, I'm sorry, what did I say?
300-point drop.
300-point drop. But let me just say this at least. When we were at the low point of the market downturn, our assets had gone down to 160 billion. Today they're at 207. So we're climbing. We've returned an asset value $50 billion, and our chief investment officer is one to say that this is very encouraging. We're obviously not out of the woods. No one believes this economy is out of the woods yet, but we are making progress. I think it's important to have that perspective as well.
So you went from 160 to 200, and does that mean happy days are here again, or?
No, not at all. But I think it means, in terms of directional progress, I think that we are moving along. We've looked at our real estate portfolio.
So I guess my question would be, in the future, again, I think one of the big issues here in this issue of pension fund management is a long-term view of how do you manage, over the decades, these issues of up and down, these holidays that we have, the long term, and again, especially in this era of term limits when all of us will be gone, and how do you essentially establish a process? I've heard some of Mr. Crane's comments, Crane, about how to, some of the reforms, and I'd like to speak to you further later on some of those topics, because I think that's really the crux of the issue, is how do you manage for the long term. Any further questions from the committee? Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to close, and thank you very much for your patience, your indulgence of the opposition and support.
The worst chairs possible for this type of meeting.
What's that?
The worst chairs.
The only thing that could make them worse is if they were electrified.
I ordered them just for you, sir.
They look like they are.
Mr. Chairman, just to address the issue was brought up by the last group of witnesses before I close. The PERS system told legislators in 2000, with the passage of SB 400, that the state's contribution levels would remain at negligible levels, 150 million or less for the next 10 years. Well, they're asking us to trust them that for the next 20 years that they'll be correct, when for the last 10 years they were off by $3.5 billion. To put that in perspective, there was a lot of talk last year when the state was completing, when this legislature was completing an historic water solution, I guess, or a partial solution to our water problem, and that included a bond. There was a lot of concern that the debt service on that bond for something as vital as our water infrastructure be capped for the first several years at below $1 billion, that it not rise. We couldn't sell those bonds until after 2015, so that we didn't have debt service over $1 billion for that one bond, because that debt service would crowd out programs. Because we are expected to be in a financial situation with the state's budget up until 2015 before we see revenues start to creep back up. Well, what we're talking about right now is already, not only has that contribution to the state's pension system well outpaced what was projected by the PERS people that were just sitting here at this table, to the tune of $3.5 billion, but that PERS contribution by the taxpayers, that crowding out of programs that was a concern last fall for just $1 billion, is going to be at $7 billion by 2015. 7 times what we were even concerned about. So we can't ignore the problem. And there are 3 things that we can do. We can require higher contributions by both the employer and the employee, which we can do that through the bargaining table, or we can do that through this legislation. We can ask them to invest in less risky assets at PERS, but that's up to them. Or we can lower benefit levels, or some combination of these 3. And I would just make a couple of points based on the opposition. That number one, no one here is denigrating whatsoever the contribution that state workers make. Nor do we denigrate in any fashion not only the contribution, the hard work that they do the risks that they take, nor do we begrudge them a pension fitting in the service that they've provided. But it needs to be one that we can afford. Now, there's a couple of things. One is that I don't quite understand the argument that all of the local units are opposed to a bill that does not affect them, but at the same time, just doing it at the state level would make the state non-competitive. Either it's going to affect the locals or it's not. The bare fact of the matter is that this bill really only deals with the state's employees. No one's blaming state employees. We're not talking about taking anything away from current employees. Our fiscal crisis is not dependent or caused by anything of state employees or their pensions. But we are looking at a crisis, and we're looking at a crisis that is already upon us, and we have to do something about it. You saw Mr. Jeunesse graph. The longer we wait, the steeper that climb is. It's no different than waiting on a personal level if you're contributing entirely to your retirement to waiting until you're 55. The amount of check that you're going to have to write every year from 55 to 65 is going to be exponentially larger than if you started when you were 25 years old. The state's in the same position now. We have that unfunded liability that we need to fund. Now, the end of this is just that, we have to start on it today. We have to make the types of decisions that I outlined in those three areas. This is one of those three areas, and it is very mild. It's not taking anything away from the dedicated people that serve our state. It doesn't take anything away from the dedicated people in public safety at the local level or any other occupation. What we're talking about is a new contract for new hires that would be sustainable for our state's future. And I'd ask for an aye vote.
Thank you very much. Let me make a statement here before we vote, and that is that I agree with you. And I think most people agree here that change is needed. You mentioned one of three things, solutions. One of them is to chase higher yield, and I'll tell you, I'm going to disagree with you in that one because that's what led to the Orange County bankruptcy.
Oh, I said less risky assets.
Okay. But I do believe, and I think everybody does, that the change is needed. I think David Crane said that. And I agree with David also that we got to protect the taxpayers, and at the same time our policies have to be such to, keep economic growth going in the state of California. We have to grow our way out of this challenge that we have economically. I think the opposition, I agree with them, they make some very good points, and the one that I found compelling was Mr. Cottingham, Ron Cottingham of PORAC, stating that some of the collective bargaining is now resulting in actual real savings right now for the current years as opposed to long term, and for the long term as well. So I think those are the kind of creative solutions that we need right now. And again, I got to come back to the real issue, and the one all of us have to address is, again, the long term. How do you come up with a policy so there aren't any holidays for those that contribute? How do we make sure we come up with a long-term stable CalPERS and pension system? And of course, at the same time, commit future legislators to something like that. I'm not too sure where it's at or how to get to that solution. And also, some of Mr. Crane's suggestions and some of those reforms for CalPERS. I wasn't there in '99 and when some of those representations were made. I remember exactly what you're talking about because I asked those very same hard questions. And I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. You're absolutely correct. And that would lead me to ask more transparency and more accountability from CalPERS. I would love to ask for a vote today, but I've just been informed that we've lost a quorum. So we can't take a vote on your bill. Yes, Mr. Cox, we lost a quorum. So what we need to do is schedule you for the next hearing that we have and bring back your bill back for a vote. And my apologies. I didn't want this to be the outcome. I didn't want to drag this out anymore.
I think we should have a full hearing again, Mr. Chairman.
Another one.
And next time I will require that each one of you testify for at least 15 minutes.
Can I?
Yes. I can't. We can't vote, Denise.
No, I don't want to vote. I appreciate the situation where we had two members who were already absent and now we don't have a full quorum. But I actually think the hearing was helpful, and I think we ought to all look at, get this more solid data, because part of what comes out of this is there's a lot of apples and oranges talk about numbers here that at least I'm more confused now than I was when I walked in the door in terms of the numbers and tossing around these things. We all know there is out year, sort of, if you will, unfunded liability. The one I've been most concerned about over the last several years has been the healthcare one, because that's such a difficult number to predict because healthcare costs were rising faster than people knew how to deal with. And we do forward fund it. We fund it at the time that somebody is retired and gets sick, not at the time. It's hard to judge today what cost our healthcare will be in 30 years, and that's been the ongoing problem. The pension's a little clearer because it's a defined benefit. We're saying we're going to pay X and Y at a certain period of time. And that's more contingent on what the salaries, but it goes back to this bargaining problem. If we don't bargain it as a whole, it doesn't have the opportunity to mix with the salary, because every time there's a salary bargain down, that actually saves pension costs, because then you're basing the retirement on a lower salary. I mean, there are a lot of these things interact in ways that make it difficult, and goes back to this problem of why would we legislate specific numbers and things. Some of the proposals you have here are things that I think folks ought to be looking at in terms of age and percentages and some of those. But it's difficult to set them in concrete as statutory and sort of lock both ourselves and future folks into it. So I would look to see some of the CalPERS numbers. I think we need to, again, kind of remember who's working here, and a lot of the CalPERS folks are the lower end of the scale, other than the public safety folks, the CSEAs and those kind of folks who are here. And again, most of this stuff is bargained by other people, not us.
Yeah.
Perhaps the governor's office will choose to talk to the 21 units in the next week or two before we get through a budget, and we could, have a better sense for how that could go forward. And I know some of that goes the other way too, where folks have been uncomfortable in those discussions because of prior bad relations. But I think most folks would dispute Mr. Crane's statement that it's been aggressive, and other than aggressively non-engaged. And I think until we get some clarity on some of that, and maybe sort of look at what's going on in the bigger picture, I think it's hard to even try to figure out what we could do today. So,
well, with the chair and the pro tem, I think we maybe ought to enter into some discussions about informational hearings on this that could explore the different aspects of this, because it is SB 919 is one aspect of the problem. It is not it does not address the entire problem, but it addresses one aspect of it.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cox, please.
Thank you. Let me just say that I think all of us, when we take a look at the contingent liability that the state is faced with relative to pension and lifetime health benefits, is one of those numbers that it is difficult to accept and figure out how you're going to get your arms around it to solve the problem. I know that Senator Hollingsworth recognizes that today this bill's not going to get out. And I listened to the testimony about the bargaining and the bargaining table, and I will in fact say that the reality is that if the California legislature and or its political subdivisions don't figure out how to solve this problem in a relatively short period of time, you in fact are going to have the people of the state of California making this revision by initiative. That's always what happens. And whether or not it would be acceptable or not, my guess is that it probably wouldn't be acceptable to those who are saying let's do this with collective bargaining. But we do in fact have a serious problem. We need to resolve the issue. I commend Senator Hollingsworth for bringing it up. He knows the bill's not going to get out. Even if we had a full committee today, that the bill's not going to get out. we can, for those of us that,
It'd be hard the whole day.
for those of us that in fact can count to 5, we know that, this bill is not going to get out. But it is a situation that it is a serious issue for the state of California and the people of the state of California, because ultimately, if the legislature doesn't fix this problem, the people of the state of California will in fact fix it. And I can give you chapter and verse on the initiatives that have been passed, because the people believe that the legislature was never going to fix it, so they might as well go ahead and fix it. So
I think we had something very similar that happened in Orange County.
Well, we had something happen at the state level. The governor proposed a pension reform. It was defeated by the voters. That was only 3 years ago.
Any further comments from the committee? I want to thank everybody for your time, and see you back for a vote.